There are moments in history where the truth was not only hidden, but carefully rewritten one sentence at a time. In a system built on control and deception, even something as personal as a letter home became part of a larger design. Imagine being told to write to your family, to reassure them, to describe a place where everything seemed calm, where work was possible, where life, somehow, continued. Words chosen carefully, sometimes dictated, sometimes guided. Messages meant to travel far beyond the fences that surrounded the sender. But what those letters did not say was just as important as what they did. In certain camps, including places like and, correspondence became part of a calculated illusion. One that extended beyond the camp itself, shaping what the outside world believed and what those yet to arrive expected. As trains continued to move across Europe, carrying people toward an uncertain destination, these letters played a quiet but powerful role. They created a sense of normality, of safety, even as reality moved in a very different direction. Some who wrote them believed they would be read again by the people they loved. Others may have sensed something was wrong, but had no way to know what would come next. In many cases, those letters would be the last connection between individuals and the lives they had been taken from. Tonight, we look closely at this lesser-known aspect of history, not through numbers or broad events, but through the small details, the words, the messages, and the silence that followed them. Because sometimes the most powerful stories are not just in what was said, but in what was never meant to be understood. And before we begin, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to In&Out Nazi Germany, and let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Every story, every memory, and every place matters. And together we keep history alive. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The Illusion begins. Segment 1. Letters that carried a different truth. As one begins to look closely at the early stages of deportation during the period of Nazi-controlled Europe, it becomes evident that movement alone was not enough to maintain order, and that beyond physical control, there existed a need to manage perception, to shape what people believed about where they were going and what awaited them upon arrival. And within this system of control, written communication, particularly letters and postcards, became one of the most subtle yet powerful tools used to maintain that illusion. The act of writing a letter home, something deeply personal and familiar, was transformed into a controlled process, where individuals were encouraged or required to send messages that suggested stability, safety, and continuation of life, even when the reality surrounding them was uncertain or already deteriorating. And as one reflects on this transformation, it becomes clear that the power of these letters did not lie in their content alone, but in the trust that existed between the sender and the receiver, a trust that allowed these messages to carry weight far beyond the limited words written on the page. Many of those who were deported came from communities where communication through letters was a normal part of life, a way to maintain connection across distance, and as they were placed into unfamiliar and controlled environments, the instruction to write home would have appeared, at least on the surface, as an opportunity to preserve that connection. Yet, what was often overlooked was the extent to which these letters were shaped by external control, whether through direct instruction, censorship, or the implicit understanding that only certain types of messages would be allowed to pass beyond the camp boundaries. As one considers the environment in which these letters were written, it becomes evident that the conditions themselves would influence what could be expressed, with limited space, strict guidelines, and the presence of authority shaping the tone and content of each message, creating a situation where the letter becomes less a personal expression and more a reflection of what was permitted to be said. The language used in these letters would often emphasize normality, referencing work, routine, or general well-being, details that, when read by those outside the camp, would suggest that the situation, while perhaps difficult, was manageable and not immediately alarming. And this perception would play a significant role in influencing how families and communities responded to the ongoing deportations, as the absence of clear warning signs reduced the likelihood of panic. or resistance. As one reflects on the broader impact of these communications, it becomes clear that they functioned as part of a larger system where information was carefully controlled and distributed in a way that supported the continuation of the process, creating a feedback loop in which the messages sent from within the camps reinforced the expectations of those who had yet to arrive. The existence of these letters also highlights the complexity of human behavior within controlled environments, as individuals writing them may have experienced a range of emotions, from hope and uncertainty to fear and confusion. Yet within the constraints placed upon them, their ability to express those emotions would be limited, resulting in messages that do not fully reflect their internal experience. As one considers this disconnect, it becomes evident that the letters represent not only a form of communication, but also a record of how reality can be shaped and presented under conditions of control, where what is written is influenced as much by what cannot be said as by what is allowed. The recipients of these letters, often family members and friends, would interpret the messages based on their existing understanding of the sender, relying on subtle cues within the text to assess the situation, yet without access to the full context. Their interpretation would be guided by the assumption that the information provided was accurate, reinforcing the illusion that the camps were places where life continued in some recognizable form. As one reflects on this dynamic, it becomes clear that the effectiveness of these letters as a tool of deception depended on the trust between sender and receiver, a trust that was manipulated within the system to achieve a specific outcome. The process of writing and sending these letters, therefore, cannot be viewed in isolation, but must be understood as part of a broader strategy that combined physical control with psychological influence, shaping not only the experience of those within the camps but also the perceptions of those beyond them, creating a situation where the reality of what was occurring remained obscured behind carefully constructed messages. As one continues to examine this aspect of history, it becomes evident that the letters, while small in form, played a significant role in maintaining the structure of the system, illustrating how even the most personal forms of communication can be transformed under conditions of control into instruments that serve a much larger purpose. As one continues to examine the role of letters within this system, it becomes increasingly clear that their influence extended beyond the immediate act of communication, shaping not only the perceptions of those who received them, but also the behavior of those who were preparing to be deported, creating a chain of expectations that influenced how individuals approached an uncertain future. The knowledge that others had already arrived and were able to write home, describing conditions that appeared stable or manageable, would contribute to a sense of continuity, reducing the perception of immediate danger and allowing the process to unfold with less resistance than might otherwise have occurred. And as one reflects on this effect, it becomes evident that the letters served as a bridge between the known and the unknown, providing a narrative that filled the gap left by the absence of reliable information. The timing of these communications would also play a role in their effectiveness, as messages sent shortly after arrival would reinforce the idea that the transition to the new environment was not only possible, but relatively uneventful, creating a sense of reassurance that could persist even as circumstances changed for those who had written the letters. As one considers the limitations of these messages, it becomes clear that the absence of detail or the presence of vague descriptions would not necessarily raise suspicion, as the recipients, lacking alternative sources of information, would interpret the letters within the context of what they hoped or expected to be true. The controlled nature of correspondence within the camps meant that not all letters would be sent freely or without oversight, and this oversight would influence not only the content of the messages but also their frequency and distribution, creating patterns that could further reinforce the illusion of normality. As one reflects on the structure of this system, it becomes evident that the letters were not isolated instances of communication, but part of a coordinated approach to managing Information, where each message contributed to a larger narrative that extended across regions. And communities. The individuals writing these letters may not have been fully aware of the role. Their words would play within the system, yet their participation, whether voluntary or compelled, became part of a process that influenced the experiences of others. The emotional dimension of writing such letters also adds complexity to this understanding, as the act of communicating with loved ones, even under constrained conditions, would carry personal significance, providing a sense of connection that could offer comfort or a temporary escape from the immediate environment. As one considers this emotional aspect, it becomes clear that the letters functioned on multiple levels, serving both as instruments of control and as expressions of human connection, a dual role that reflects the complexity of life within the camps. The recipients of these letters, in turn, would respond based on the information they received, making decisions about their own actions and expectations in a context where accurate information was limited. And, as one reflects on this dynamic, it becomes evident that the influence of the letters extended beyond the individual level, shaping the collective understanding of entire communities. The continuation of this system over time would reinforce the patterns it created, as each new set of letters added to the existing body of communication, strengthening the perception that the situation was stable and predictable. As one considers the cumulative effect of these messages, it becomes clear that they contributed to a form of psychological management that operated alongside physical control, influencing not only what people knew but how they felt and how they responded to the information available to them. The letters, therefore, represent more than just written words. They are part of a broader mechanism through which perception was shaped and maintained, illustrating how communication, when controlled, can become a powerful tool in influencing behavior and understanding. Segment 2. Words written under control. As one begins to examine more closely how these letters were actually written, it becomes evident that the act itself was rarely as free or personal as it might appear on the surface, and that behind each message sent beyond the camp boundaries there existed layers of control, limitation, and influence that shaped what could be said, how it could be said, and even whether it would be sent at all. The materials used for writing, often postcards or pre-approved paper, were not chosen by the individuals themselves, but provided within a controlled system that determined both the format and the space available for communication. And as one reflects on this limitation, it becomes clear that the physical structure of the letter already imposed a boundary on expression, restricting the length and detail of what could be written. The language used within these messages would also be shaped by both explicit and implicit rules, with certain topics discouraged or entirely forbidden, creating a situation where individuals learned, either through instruction or observation, to write in a manner that aligned with what was permitted. As one considers this adaptation, it becomes evident that the process of writing under such conditions required a careful balance between expressing something meaningful and ensuring that the message would not be rejected or withheld, and this balance would influence not only the content of the letters but also their tone, which often leaned toward reassurance and normality. The presence of censorship, whether direct or indirect, played a significant role in shaping these communications, as letters were subject to review before being sent, and any content that did not align with the expectations of those overseeing the process could be altered, removed, or prevented from leaving the camp altogether. As one reflects on this oversight, it becomes clear that the letters that reached their destinations represent only a portion of what may have been written, filtered through a system that determined which messages were acceptable and which were not. The individuals writing these letters would therefore be aware, to varying degrees, of the need to conform to these expectations, leading to a form of self-censorship where certain thoughts or observations were left unexpressed, either out of necessity or in the hope that the letter would successfully reach its intended recipient. As one considers the psychological impact Of this process, it becomes evident that it would influence not only what was written but how individuals perceive their own situation, as the act of framing their experience in a certain way could shape their understanding of it, even if only temporarily. The repetition of certain phrases or themes across multiple letters suggests that there were patterns in how these messages were constructed, reflecting a shared understanding of what was acceptable to communicate, and as one reflects on these patterns, it becomes clear that they contributed to the consistency of the narrative being presented to the outside world. The recipients of these letters, reading messages that often contained similar reassurances, would be less likely to question their validity, as the repetition reinforced the perception of stability and normality. As one considers the broader implications of this consistency, it becomes evident that the letters functioned not only as individual communications but as part of a collective narrative that extended across different camps and regions, shaping the perception of the system as a whole. The environment in which these letters were written would also influence their content, as the conditions within the camp, limited privacy, constant supervision, and the presence of others would affect how individuals approached the act of writing, potentially leading to messages that were more restrained or generalized than they might have been under different circumstances. As one reflects on these environmental factors, it becomes clear that the letters cannot be fully understood without considering the context in which they were created, where every aspect of the process, from the materials used to the conditions of writing, contributed to the final message. The act of writing, therefore, becomes not just a means of communication, but a reflection of the system within which it occurred, revealing how control can extend into even the most personal aspects of human experience. As one continues to examine this process, it becomes evident that the letters represent a convergence of personal intention and external influence, where the desire to communicate is shaped by the constraints of the environment, resulting in messages that carry both what is said and what is left unsaid. As one continues to explore the controlled nature of these written communications, it becomes increasingly clear that the influence exerted over them extended beyond the immediate act of writing, shaping the expectations and behaviors of both those who sent the letters and those who received them, creating a system in which communication itself became part of a broader structure of management and perception. The individuals who were instructed to write would often do so within a framework that suggested not only what should be included but also what tone should be maintained, emphasizing reassurance and continuity. And as one reflects on this guidance, it becomes evident that the letters were designed to project a specific image, one that aligned with the narrative being presented beyond the camp. This projection of normality would have a significant impact on the recipients, who, lacking alternative sources of information, would interpret the letters as reliable accounts of the situation. And as one considers this reliance, it becomes clear that the effectiveness of the letters as a tool of perception depended heavily on the trust placed in them by those reading them. The delay between the writing and the receiving of these letters would also influence how they were understood, as the passage of time could obscure the context in which they were written, leading recipients to interpret them as current reflections of the situation rather than as messages shaped by earlier conditions or constraints. As one reflects on this temporal aspect, it becomes evident that the letters existed within a broader timeline, where the timing of their arrival could influence their impact, reinforcing perceptions that may no longer correspond to the reality at the time of reading. The distribution of these letters across different regions would further extend their influence, as messages sent to one location could be shared with others, spreading the narrative beyond the immediate circle of the sender and contributing to a wider understanding that was shaped by these controlled communications. As one considers this dissemination, it becomes clear that the letters functioned as part of a network of information, where each message contributed to a larger picture that influenced how entire communities perceived the situation. The individuals writing these letters while operating within constraints may have experienced a sense of connection or purpose in the act of communication, as the ability to reach out to loved ones, even in a limited way, could provide a form of emotional support, and as one reflects on this aspect, it becomes evident that the letters served a dual role, functioning both as instruments of control and as expressions of human connection. This duality adds complexity to the understanding of these communications, as it highlights the interplay between external influence and personal intention, where the same message can carry different meanings depending on the perspective from which it is viewed. The recipients, in turn, would respond to these letters in ways that reflect their own understanding and expectations, making decisions and forming beliefs based on the information available to them, and as one considers this response, it becomes clear that the letters influenced not only perception but also action, shaping how individuals approached the possibility of deportation or relocation. The continuation of this system over time would reinforce its effectiveness, as repeated exposure to similar messages would strengthen the narrative being presented, making it more difficult to question or challenge. As one reflects on this reinforcement, it becomes evident that the letters were part of a sustained effort to manage perception, operating alongside other elements of the system to create a consistent and controlled flow of information. The absence of contradictory messages would further support this consistency, as the lack of alternative perspectives would limit the ability of recipients to form a more complete understanding of the situation. As one considers the cumulative effect of these factors, it becomes clear that the letters represent a sophisticated use of communication within a controlled environment, where the management of information played a crucial role in shaping both individual and collective perceptions. Segment 3. Messages that shaped expectation. As one continues to follow the path of these letters beyond the fences of the camps, it becomes increasingly clear that their influence did not end at the moment they were sent, but instead continued to shape expectations, decisions, and perceptions in places far removed from where they were written, creating a ripple effect that extended through families, communities, and entire regions. The recipients of these messages, often reading them in homes that still carried a sense of normal life, would interpret the words through the lens of trust, familiarity, and hope, relying on the belief that the person writing the letter was able to communicate truthfully about their situation, and as one reflects on this dynamic, it becomes evident that the emotional connection between sender and receiver played a central role in how these messages were understood. The tone of reassurance that appeared in many of these letters, references to work, routine, or general well-being, would contribute to a perception that, while conditions may not be ideal, they were not immediately threatening, and this perception would influence how recipients responded to the broader situation unfolding around them. As one considers the impact of this reassurance, it becomes clear that it could reduce the sense of urgency or danger associated with deportation, shaping decisions in ways that align with the narrative being presented. The absence of explicit warnings or expressions of fear within these letters would further reinforce this perception, as the lack of negative information would be interpreted as an indication that such concerns were not present, and as one reflects on this absence, it becomes evident that what is not said can be as influential as what is included. The letters, therefore, functioned not only as sources of information but as tools that shaped understanding by guiding interpretation, creating a framework within which recipients formed their beliefs about the situation. The sharing of these letters within communities would amplify their impact, as messages received by one individual could be read and discussed by others, spreading the narrative beyond the immediate circle of the sender and contributing to a collective perception that extended across social networks. As one considers this communal aspect, it becomes clear that the influence of the letters was not limited to individual relationships but operated on a broader scale, affecting how groups of people understood and responded to events. The consistency of the messages with similar themes, appearing across different letters, would further strengthen this collective understanding, creating a sense of reliability and reinforcing the perception that the information being conveyed was accurate. As one reflects on this consistency, it becomes evident that it contributed to the stability of the narrative, making it more difficult to question or challenge, particularly in the absence of alternative sources of information. The timing of these letters, arriving at intervals that suggested ongoing communication, would also play a role in maintaining this perception, as the continued receipt of messages would indicate that the sender remained safe and able to write, reinforcing the idea that the situation was stable over time. As one considers the effect of this continuity, it becomes clear that it would influence expectations about the future, shaping how individuals prepared for or responded to the possibility of deportation themselves. The letters, therefore, did not simply describe a situation. They actively shaped how that situation was perceived and understood, creating expectations that aligned with the narrative being presented. As one continues to reflect on this process, it becomes evident that the power of these letters lay not only in their content but in their ability to influence perception at a distance, extending the reach of the system beyond its physical boundaries and into the lives of those who had yet to experience it directly. The recipients, trusting in the words they read, would form an understanding of events that was shaped by these controlled communications, illustrating how information, when managed effectively, can influence behavior and decision-making on a wide scale. As one looks deeper into the broader implications of these letters and the expectations they created, it becomes clear that their influence extended into the very moment of departure for many individuals, shaping how they approached the journey itself and what they believed awaited them at the end of it, creating a psychological environment that was defined not by certainty but by guided perception. The idea that others had already arrived and were able to write home, describing manageable conditions, would contribute to a sense of continuity, suggesting that the transition, while difficult, was not beyond endurance, and as one reflects on this belief, it becomes evident that it could influence how individuals prepared for departure, what they chose to bring with them, and how they emotionally processed the situation. The presence of these expectations would also affect behavior during the journey, as individuals who believed they were being relocated for work or resettlement would respond differently than those who anticipated immediate danger, and as one considers this difference, it becomes clear that perception plays a significant role in shaping human response. The absence of clear information, combined with the presence of reassuring messages, would create a situation where individuals rely on the most accessible and trusted sources available to them, and in many cases these letters served as that source, guiding understanding in the absence of direct experience. The continuation of this system over time would reinforce these expectations, as each new group of individuals received similar messages, creating a pattern that became increasingly difficult to question, particularly in environments where alternative perspectives were limited or unavailable. As one reflects on this reinforcement, it becomes evident that the letters contributed to a form of psychological continuity, where the narrative presented to those outside the camps aligned with the experience being constructed within them, creating a seamless flow of information that supported the overall structure of the system. The individuals who wrote these letters, whether aware of their broader impact or not, became part of this process, their words carrying meaning beyond their immediate intention and influencing events in ways that extended far beyond their control. As one considers the weight of this influence, it becomes clear that the letters represent more than just personal communication. They are part of a larger mechanism through which perception was shaped and maintained. The eventual realization, for those who survived or for those who later examined these events, that these letters did not fully reflect reality, adds another layer to their significance, highlighting the gap between perception and experience and illustrating how easily that gap can be maintained under conditions of controlled information. As one continues to reflect on this dynamic, it becomes evident that the letters stand as a reminder of the power of communication, not only to connect individuals but also to shape understanding, influence behavior, and construct narratives that can persist even in the absence of complete truth. Chapter 2. The Final Messages. Segment 1. Writing Without Knowing. As one begins to reflect on the later stages of this process, it becomes evident that the act of writing these letters carried a deeper and more complex meaning than might first be understood, particularly when considering that many of those who wrote them did so without full awareness of what lay ahead, creating a situation where the words placed on paper were shaped not only by external control but also by incomplete knowledge and uncertain expectation. The instruction to write home, often presented as a routine or administrative step, would be interpreted by individuals through the lens of their own experiences and assumptions, leading many to approach the task as a genuine opportunity to communicate with loved ones, to provide reassurance, or to maintain a sense of connection in a moment of transition. As one considers this perspective, it becomes clear that the letters often reflected a mixture of hope, confusion, and adaptation, where the absence of clear information about the future allowed individuals to rely on what they believed or were led to believe about their situation. The environment in which these letters were written would reinforce this uncertainty, as new arrivals encountered unfamiliar conditions that could be interpreted in different ways depending on context, with certain aspects appearing organized or structured enough to suggest that life in some form would continue. As one reflects on this initial stage of arrival, it becomes evident that the lack of immediate clarity about what would follow created a space in which individuals could still hold onto expectations of normality. And it is within this space that many of these letters were composed. The words chosen, often simple and direct, would aim to reassure, to reduce worry, and to maintain a sense of continuity with the life left behind. And as one considers the emotional motivation behind these messages, it becomes clear that they were not only shaped by external constraints, but also by the natural human desire to protect others from fear or uncertainty. The brevity of the messages, influenced by the limited space available, would further encourage a focus on essential points, often emphasizing well-being and stability while leaving out details that might be more difficult to express or that could raise concern. As one reflects on this selective expression, it becomes evident that the letters present a version of reality that is both constructed and sincere, where the intention to communicate truthfully is filtered through the constraints of the situation. The absence of explicit warning or distress within these messages would, in many cases, reflect not only the restrictions imposed on communication, but also the lack of full awareness on the part of the writer, creating a situation where the message aligns with the narrative being maintained, without necessarily being consciously deceptive. As one considers this alignment, it becomes clear that the letters occupy a unique position within this system, where they are both personal expressions and components of a broader structure of controlled information. The recipients of these letters, reading them without knowledge of the conditions under which they were written, would interpret them as genuine reflections of the writer's situation, reinforcing the perception that the circumstances, while perhaps challenging, were not immediately threatening. As one reflects on this interpretation, it becomes evident that the gap between what was experienced and what was communicated was not always the result of intentional omission, but often a consequence of the limited information available to the writer at the time. The letters, therefore, capture a moment in which perception, expectation, and reality intersect, revealing how individuals navigate uncertainty by relying on the information and assumptions available to them. As one continues to examine this aspect, it becomes clear that the act of writing under such Conditions represents a complex interplay between personal intention and systemic influence, where the words written carry meaning that extends beyond the immediate context, shaping understanding both within and beyond the environment in which they were created. As one continues to explore the significance of these final messages, it becomes increasingly clear that their impact cannot be fully understood without considering the emotional and psychological dimensions of the act of writing, particularly in a context where individuals were navigating uncertainty and attempting to maintain a sense of connection with those they had left behind. The decision to write, even when prompted or required, would involve a moment of reflection, where the individual considers what to say, how to say it, and what the message might mean to the person receiving it, and as one reflects on this moment, it becomes evident that the letters were not simply administrative tasks, but acts of communication that carried personal significance. The content of these messages, often focused on reassurance and continuity, would serve not only to inform the recipient, but also to reinforce a sense of stability for the writer, creating a narrative that could be held onto in the absence of clear information about the future. As one considers this dual function, it becomes clear that the letters operate on both an external and internal level, shaping perception for both the sender and the receiver. The constraints under which these letters were written would influence the form and content of the messages, yet within those constraints, individuals would still attempt to convey something meaningful, whether through tone, choice of words, or subtle emphasis, and as one reflects on these attempts, it becomes evident that even within limited communication, there exists a desire to connect and to be understood. The recipients, reading these letters in a different context, would interpret them based on their relationship with the writer, their expectations, and the information available to them, creating a dynamic where the same message can carry different meanings depending on perspective. As one considers this interpretive process, it becomes clear that the letters function as points of connection between two environments, linking the controlled conditions of the camp with the relative normality of life outside it, and in doing so, they bridge a gap that would otherwise be defined by absence and uncertainty. The continuation of this communication, even in a limited form, would provide a sense of continuity that could influence how individuals on both sides of the exchange understood the situation, reinforcing narratives that align with the information being presented. As one reflects on this continuity, it becomes evident that the letters contributed to a sustained perception of stability, even as conditions changed or deteriorated for those within the camps. The absence of further communication, when it occurred, would then be interpreted in various ways, often influenced by the previous messages received, highlighting how earlier communications shape later understanding. As one considers the broader implications of this process, it becomes clear that the letters represent a complex form of communication in which meaning is constructed through a combination of content, context, and interpretation, illustrating how information can be shaped and understood differently depending on the conditions under which it is created and received. Segment 2. Letters that were never meant to warn. As one begins to examine more closely the deeper function of these letters within the broader system, it becomes evident that their role extended beyond simple communication, evolving into a form of controlled messaging that shaped not only what was understood but what was deliberately left unrecognized, creating a situation where the absence of warning became as significant as the presence of reassurance. The individuals who wrote these letters, often under conditions of uncertainty and limited knowledge, did not possess the full context of what lay ahead, and as a result, their words were not constructed as warnings, but as reflections of what they perceived or were guided to believe in that moment. As one reflects on this absence of warning, it becomes clear that it played a crucial role in maintaining the continuity of the system, as those who received these messages would have no reason to interpret them as signals of immediate danger. The language used in these letters often focused on routine, work, or general well-being would reinforce the idea that life continued in a recognizable form, even if altered by circumstance, and as one considers the effect of this language, it becomes evident that it contributed to a narrative that reduced the likelihood of alarm or resistance. The structure of the communication itself, limited in space and subject to oversight, would further shape the message, guiding it toward simplicity and clarity while excluding details that might introduce uncertainty or concern. As one reflects on these constraints, it becomes clear that the letters represent a form of communication where what is omitted is as influential as what is included, creating a controlled representation of reality that aligns with the broader objectives of the system. The recipients of these letters, reading them within the context of their own lives and expectations, would interpret them as genuine accounts, relying on the trust they placed in the sender to understand the situation, and as one considers this reliance, it becomes evident that the effectiveness of these letters depended heavily on the emotional bond between sender and receiver. The repetition of similar themes across multiple letters would reinforce this perception, creating a sense of consistency that made the narrative more believable, and as one reflects on this repetition, it becomes clear that it contributed to a collective understanding that extended beyond individual relationships. The absence of contradictory information would further strengthen this understanding, as the lack of alternative perspectives limited the ability of recipients to question or reinterpret the messages they received. As one considers the broader implications of this controlled communication, it becomes evident that the letters functioned as part of a larger system of perception management, where information was carefully shaped to influence how events were understood both within and beyond the camps. The individuals writing these letters, while participating in this system, may not have been fully aware of its broader impact, yet their words became part of a narrative that influenced the behavior and expectations of others. As one reflects on this dynamic, it becomes clear that the letters occupy a complex position within history, representing both personal expressions of communication and elements of a structured system that guided perception. The absence of warning within these messages, therefore, cannot be viewed simply as a lack of information, but as a reflection of the conditions under which they were written, where knowledge, expression, and control intersected to produce a form of communication that shaped understanding in subtle yet significant ways. As one continues to examine this aspect, it becomes evident that the letters serve as a reminder of how information, when limited or guided, can influence perception not only through what is said but through what is left unsaid, illustrating the power of controlled communication in shaping both individual and collective understanding. As one continues to explore the implications of these letters that were never meant to warn, it becomes increasingly clear that their influence extended into the broader social and psychological landscape, shaping not only individual perceptions, but also the collective response of communities that relied on these messages to understand an unfolding reality they could not directly observe. The recipients of these letters, often reading them in familiar surroundings far removed from the camps, would interpret the words through the lens of their existing knowledge. An emotional connection to the sender, and as one reflects on this interpretive process, it becomes evident that the absence of warning within the letters would reinforce a sense of continuity and stability, even as external circumstances suggested change. The trust placed in these messages would lead individuals to form expectations based on what they read, influencing how they responded to the possibility of deportation or relocation, and as one considers this influence, it becomes clear that the letters played a role in shaping decisions and behaviors in ways that aligned with the narrative being presented. The timing of these communications would further affect their impact, as letters received shortly after departure would suggest that the transition had been completed without immediate harm, reinforcing the perception that the process, while difficult, was not necessarily dangerous. As one reflects on the significance of timing, it becomes evident that it contributed to the credibility of the messages, aligning the narrative with the expectations of those receiving it. The sharing of these letters within communities would amplify their influence as individuals discussed and interpreted the messages together, creating a collective understanding that extended beyond individual relationships. As one considers this communal aspect, it becomes clear that the letters functioned as part of a network of communication that shaped the perception of entire groups, reinforcing a narrative that was consistent and widely accepted. The absence of alternative sources of information would further strengthen this effect, as the lack of contradictory evidence limited the ability of individuals to question the messages they received. As one reflects on this limitation, it becomes evident that the letters operated within an environment where information was scarce and controlled, allowing them to carry greater weight than they might have in a different context. The eventual realization, for those who later examined these events, that these letters did not fully reflect reality adds a layer of complexity to their interpretation, highlighting the gap between perception and experience and illustrating how easily that gap can be maintained under conditions of controlled information. As one considers this realization, it becomes clear that the letters serve as both historical documents and examples of how communication can be shaped to influence understanding, demonstrating the importance of context in interpreting any form of information. The broader implications of this process extend beyond the specific events in which it occurred, offering insight into how systems of control can operate through subtle means, shaping perception, not only through direct instruction, but through the careful management of what is communicated and what is withheld. As one continues to reflect on this dynamic, it becomes evident that the letters represent a powerful example of how information, when controlled, can influence not only individual understanding but also collective belief, shaping the way events are perceived and remembered over time. Segment 3. The silence that followed. As one begins to consider the final stage of this process, it becomes evident that the most powerful aspect of these letters was not only what they contained, but what came after them, the gradual, quiet absence of further communication, a silence that unfolded without explanation and was often interpreted through the lens of the messages that had come before. The letters, having established a sense of continuity and reassurance, created expectations that extended into the future, and as one reflects on this expectation, it becomes clear that the absence of new messages would not immediately be understood as a sign of finality, but rather as a delay, a disruption, or a temporary interruption in communication. The recipients, relying on the previous tone of normality conveyed through the letters, would attempt to reconcile the silence with the narrative they had been given, searching for explanations that aligned with what they believed to be true. And as one considers this process, it becomes evident that the earlier messages continued to shape perception even in their absence. The delay of communication, which might under other circumstances raise concern, would instead be interpreted as a result of logistical challenges, changes in routine, or other plausible factors, allowing the silence to persist without immediate alarm. As one reflects on this interpretation, it becomes clear that the letters had established a framework within which the absence of communication could be understood in ways that did not contradict the existing narrative. The emotional connection between sender and receiver would further influence this process, as the desire to believe in the well-being of a loved one would lead individuals to adopt interpretations that preserved hope, even in the face of uncertainty. As one considers the role of hope in this context, it becomes evident that it can shape perception in powerful ways, guiding how information, or the lack of it, is understood and processed. The gradual nature of the silence would also contribute to its effect, as the absence of a clear moment of transition from communication to non-communication would make it more difficult to identify when the situation had changed, creating a prolonged period of uncertainty. As one reflects on this gradual transition, it becomes clear that it allowed the narrative established by the letters to persist longer than it might have under more abrupt circumstances, reinforcing the perception of continuity even as reality diverged from that perception. The sharing of this silence within communities would further influence understanding as individuals compared their experiences, noting similar patterns of communication followed by absence, yet often interpreting these patterns within the same framework of expectation created by the earlier messages. As one considers this communal aspect, it becomes evident that the silence, like the letters before it, became part of a collective experience, shaping how groups of people understood and responded to the situation. The lack of definitive information would prevent the formation of a clear alternative narrative, allowing the original perception to remain dominant despite the absence of new evidence to support it. As one reflects on this dynamic, it becomes clear that the silence was not merely the absence of communication, but a continuation of the system of perception that had been established, where the lack of information functioned in a way that maintained the existing narrative. The individuals who had written these letters, now no longer able to communicate, left behind messages that continued to influence those who received them, creating a lasting impact that extended beyond their immediate context. As one continues to examine this aspect, it becomes evident that the silence that followed these letters represents a final stage in the process, where the absence of communication becomes a powerful element in shaping understanding, illustrating how both presence and absence can be used to influence perception. As one continues to reflect on the silence that followed these final messages, it becomes increasingly clear that its significance lies not only in its immediate impact, but in how it was later understood, interpreted, and remembered, revealing the extent to which earlier communications shaped the framework through which absence itself was perceived. The individuals who received these letters, having formed an understanding based on the information available to them, would carry that understanding forward even as new information failed to arrive, creating a lasting impression that influenced how they processed the unfolding reality. As one considers this continuity of perception, it becomes evident that the letters did not simply communicate a moment in time, but established a narrative that persisted beyond their physical presence, shaping how subsequent events were interpreted. The eventual recognition, for those who later learned more about what had occurred, that the silence was not temporary but final, introduces a profound contrast between expectation and reality, highlighting the gap that can exist between what is believed and what is true. As one reflects on this contrast, it becomes clear that the letters and the silence that followed them must be understood together as parts of a single process in which communication and its absence both contribute to shaping perception. The emotional impact of this realization, experienced at different times and in different ways by those who lived through these events, underscores the importance of understanding how information is conveyed and interpreted, particularly in situations where access to truth is limited. As one considers the broader implications of this dynamic, it becomes evident that the story of these letters is not only about the past, but about the nature of communication itself, illustrating how the context in which information is created and received can influence its meaning and impact. The silence, therefore, becomes more than an endpoint. It is a continuation of the narrative established by the letters, a space in which interpretation takes place in the absence of new information, guided by the expectations that have already been formed. As one continues to reflect on this process, it becomes clear that the letters and the silence together reveal the complexity of understanding events that are mediated through controlled communication, where both what is said and what is not said contribute to shaping perception. Chapter 3: The System Behind the Illusion. Segment 1: Designing Belief. As one begins to move beyond the individual letters themselves and toward the broader structure that allowed them to exist, it becomes evident that these messages were not isolated occurrences, but part of a system that relied on carefully shaped perception, where belief did not emerge by chance but was influenced through a combination of controlled information, repetition, and the natural human tendency to seek stability in uncertain situations. The instruction to write letters home was not simply an administrative detail, but one element within a wider environment in which communication, behavior, and expectation were all guided in subtle yet consistent ways. And as one reflects on this environment, it becomes clear that the effectiveness of such a system depended not only on what was done, but on how it was experienced and interpreted by those within it. The physical surroundings themselves would contribute to this perception, as certain aspects of order, such as structured routines, organized spaces, or visible systems of management, could create an impression of stability even when underlying conditions were far more complex. As one considers the role of these visible elements, it becomes evident that they formed part of a larger framework through which individuals interpreted their situation, using what they could observe to construct an understanding of what was happening around them. The presence of authority figures, administrative processes, and regulated activities would reinforce this impression, suggesting that the environment, while unfamiliar, operated according to a set of rules that could be understood and navigated. As one reflects on this sense of structure, it becomes clear that it played a role in shaping how individuals approached the act of writing letters, as the perception of order would influence the tone and content of their messages, leading them to describe their situation in ways that aligned with what they observed or believed. The repetition of certain experiences, such as routine tasks or scheduled activities, would further contribute to this perception, creating a rhythm that could be interpreted as continuity, even in a setting where uncertainty remained present. As one considers the impact of repetition, it becomes evident that it reinforces belief by providing consistent points of reference, allowing individuals to form expectations based on patterns they observe over time. The absence of immediate contradiction to these patterns would strengthen their effect, as the lack of clear evidence to the contrary would allow the constructed narrative to persist. As one reflects on this absence, it becomes clear that it is not only the presence of certain elements that shapes belief, but also the absence of others, particularly those that might challenge or disrupt the existing understanding. The act of writing letters, therefore, becomes part of a broader process in which individuals interpret their environment and communicate that interpretation to others, creating a cycle in which perception is both formed and reinforced through communication. The recipients of these letters, reading them, without direct experience of the environment, would rely on the descriptions provided to construct their own understanding, and as one considers this reliance, it becomes evident that the letters served as a bridge between two different contexts, transferring not only information, but also the interpretation of that information. The consistency of this interpretation across multiple letters would further strengthen its credibility, creating a shared narrative that extended beyond individual experiences. As one reflects on the formation of this shared narrative, it becomes clear that belief is not created in isolation, but through the interaction of multiple sources of information, each reinforcing the others in a way that makes the overall picture appear coherent and reliable. The system that allowed these letters to function effectively therefore relied on a combination of visible structure, controlled communication, and the natural processes through which individuals interpret and share information, illustrating how belief can be shaped through a complex interplay of factors that operate both within and beyond the immediate environment. As one continues to examine how belief was shaped within this system, it becomes increasingly clear that its effectiveness depended not only on external control, but also on internal acceptance, where individuals, in the absence of complete information, would construct their own understanding of events based on the fragments available to them, and as one reflects on this process, it becomes evident that human perception tends to favor coherence, seeking patterns and explanations that make sense of uncertainty. The letters, in this context, provided one of the most accessible and trusted sources of information, offering a narrative that could be easily integrated into existing beliefs and expectations, and as one considers this integration, it becomes clear that it would influence not only how individuals interpreted their current situation, but also how they anticipated the future. The anticipation of what lies ahead is shaped by what is known or believed, and in the absence of contradictory evidence, the narrative established by the letters would serve as a foundation for expectation, guiding both thought and behavior. As one reflects on this anticipatory aspect, it becomes evident that belief does not simply describe the present, but actively shapes the way individuals prepare for what comes next. The continuity of communication would reinforce this process, as each new message added to the existing body of information, strengthening the narrative and making it more resistant to doubt. As one considers the cumulative effect of these messages, it becomes clear that belief can become self-sustaining, supported by repetition and the absence of alternative perspectives. The role of community in this process would further amplify its impact, as individuals shared and discussed the letters they received, creating a collective understanding that extended beyond personal experience. As one reflects on this communal dimension, it becomes evident that belief is not only an individual phenomenon, but a social one, shaped through interaction and shared interpretation. The consistency of the narrative across different sources would enhance its credibility, as multiple letters describing similar conditions would be seen as confirmation rather than coincidence. As one considers this reinforcement, it becomes clear that the system relied on the alignment of individual messages to create a unified perception, where each letter contributed to the overall narrative. The absence of direct contradiction within the system would allow it to persist, as the lack of conflicting information limited the opportunity for doubt to emerge. As one reflects on the importance of this absence, it becomes evident that belief is often maintained not only through the presence of supporting evidence, but through the absence of evidence that challenges it. The eventual realization, for those who later examined these events, that the beliefs formed during this time did not fully reflect reality highlights the complexity of perception under conditions of limited information, illustrating how easily understanding can be shaped by the context in which information is received. As one continues to reflect on this dynamic, it becomes clear that the system behind the illusion was not defined by a single element, but by the interaction of multiple factors: structure, communication, repetition, and interpretation, all working together to shape belief in a way that influenced both individual and collective understanding. Segment 2. Controlling the narrative. As one continues to explore how this system operated beneath the surface, it becomes increasingly clear that shaping belief was not only about creating structure but also about controlling the narrative that flowed through that structure, guiding what information moved outward, what remained contained, and how events were understood both inside and outside the environment in which they occurred. The letters written by individuals were only one part of this narrative, functioning as visible fragments of a much larger process in which communication was filtered, directed, and aligned to maintain a consistent impression. And as one reflects on this process, it becomes evident that the effectiveness of such a system depended on its ability to appear natural, to blend into ordinary expectations of communication rather than stand apart as something unusual. The idea of writing home, after all, was not inherently suspicious, but a familiar act rooted in everyday life, and by incorporating this act into the system, the narrative gained a layer of authenticity that made it more difficult to question. As one considers the role of familiarity, it becomes clear that it serves as a foundation for trust, allowing messages to be accepted without extensive scrutiny, particularly in situations where alternative sources of information are limited or unavailable. The consistency of tone across many letters, often emphasizing routine, work, and general well-being, would reinforce this trust, creating a pattern that recipients could recognize and rely upon, and as one reflects on this consistency, it becomes evident that repetition plays a key role in establishing credibility, transforming individual messages into a coherent narrative that appears stable over time. The control of this narrative would extend beyond the content of the letters themselves, encompassing the conditions under which they were written, the timing of their delivery, and the selection of which messages were allowed to pass beyond the boundaries of the environment. As one considers these layers of control, it becomes clear that the narrative was not a passive reflection of events, but an actively managed representation designed to influence perception. The individuals writing these letters, while participating in this process, may not have been fully aware of its broader implications, yet their words became part of a system that shaped how others understood the situation, illustrating how personal communication can be integrated into a larger framework of influence. The recipients, in turn, would interpret these messages within the context of their own experiences and expectations, relying on the trust they placed in the sender to form an understanding of events. And as one reflects on this reliance, it becomes evident that the narrative's strength lay in its ability to align with what people wanted to believe, offering reassurance in place of uncertainty. The absence of conflicting information would further support this alignment, as the lack of alternative perspectives limited the opportunity for doubt to emerge, allowing the narrative to persist even as conditions changed. As one considers the broader implications of this controlled narrative, it becomes clear that it functioned as a bridge between perception and reality, shaping understanding in ways that extended beyond the immediate context of the letters themselves. The narrative, therefore, becomes not just a collection of messages, but a system of communication that influences how events are interpreted, illustrating how control over information can shape both individual and collective understanding in subtle yet significant ways. As one continues to examine the mechanics of narrative control within this system, it becomes evident that its effectiveness depended not only on what was communicated, but also on how the flow of information was managed over time, creating a rhythm of communication that reinforced the narrative while minimizing the opportunity for contradiction or reinterpretation. The timing of letters, for example, would play a significant role in shaping perception, as messages that arrived at regular intervals would suggest continuity and stability, reinforcing the idea that the situation being described was ongoing and consistent. As one reflects on this timing, it becomes clear that it contributes to the credibility of the narrative, aligning the flow of information with expectations of normal communication patterns. The gaps between messages when they occurred would be interpreted within the framework already established by previous letters, often seen as delays, rather than indicators of change, and as one considers this interpretation, it becomes evident that the narrative had been constructed in such a way that it could sustain itself even in the absence of new information. The selective nature of communication would further support this process, as only certain messages would be allowed to circulate, ensuring that the overall narrative remained consistent and aligned with the intended perception. As one reflects on this selectivity, it becomes clear that it plays a crucial role in maintaining the integrity of the narrative, preventing the introduction of conflicting perspectives that could disrupt the established understanding. The role of community in reinforcing this narrative cannot be overlooked, as individuals shared and discussed the letters they received, creating a collective interpretation that extended beyond individual experience. As one considers this communal reinforcement, it becomes evident that belief is strengthened through social interaction, where shared understanding becomes more resilient than isolated perception. The repetition of similar themes across different messages would further solidify this collective belief, creating a sense of confirmation that made the narrative appear reliable and accurate. As one reflects on this repetition, it becomes clear that it transforms individual messages into a unified story, where each letter contributes to the overall impression of stability and normality. The absence of direct contradiction within this system would allow the narrative to persist, as the lack of opposing information limited the ability of individuals to question or reinterpret what they had been told. As one considers the importance of this absence, it becomes evident that control over information is as much about what is withheld as what is shared, shaping perception through both presence and omission. The eventual recognition, for those who later examined these events, that the narrative did not fully reflect reality highlights the complexity of understanding under conditions of limited information, illustrating how easily perception can be guided when access to alternative perspectives is restricted. As one continues to reflect on this process, it becomes clear that controlling the narrative was not a single action, but an ongoing effort that involved managing the flow of information, reinforcing patterns of communication, and aligning messages with expectations, creating a system in which perception was shaped through a combination of structure, repetition, and interpretation. Segment 3. When reality could no longer be hidden. As one continues to follow the development of this system, it becomes evident that while perception can be shaped for a time, it cannot remain entirely separate from reality indefinitely, and there comes a point where the structure that supports a controlled narrative begins to encounter limits, where inconsistencies emerge, and where the absence of complete information can no longer fully sustain the expectations that were previously established. The letters, which once provided a sense of continuity and reassurance, existed within a framework that depended on consistency, repetition, and the absence of contradiction, yet over time subtle shifts would begin to appear, whether in the form of delays, changes in tone, or the gradual reduction in communication itself. As one reflects on these shifts, it becomes clear that they introduce a degree of uncertainty that cannot be entirely resolved within the existing narrative, creating space for questions to arise, even if those questions are not immediately answered. The individuals receiving these letters, having relied on them as a primary source of information, would begin to notice patterns that did not fully align with their expectations, and as one considers this recognition, it becomes evident that perception is not static but evolves as new information, or the lack of it, emerges. The absence of further communication, when it extended beyond what could be explained by ordinary delays, would gradually challenge the assumptions that had been formed, leading to a reassessment of what the earlier messages might have meant. As one reflects on this process of reassessment, it becomes clear that the narrative, once accepted without question, begins to lose its stability when it is no longer reinforced by consistent communication. The emotional dimension of this shift is significant, as the transition from reassurance to uncertainty would affect not only how individuals understood the situation, but also how they felt about it, introducing elements of doubt, concern, and the search for explanation. As one considers the role of emotion in this context, it becomes evident that it can both sustain and challenge belief, guiding how individuals respond to changes in information. The sharing of these emerging uncertainties within communities would further influence understanding, as individuals compared experiences and sought to interpret the patterns they observed, and as one reflects on this communal process, it becomes clear that collective interpretation can amplify both certainty and doubt depending on the information available. The lack of clear answers would make it difficult to form a definitive alternative narrative, yet the presence of inconsistencies would prevent the original narrative from remaining fully intact, creating a state of tension between what was believed and what could no longer be confirmed. As one considers this tension, it becomes evident that it represents a critical point in the process, where the system that once maintained perception begins to encounter the limits of its effectiveness. The letters, having served as a foundation for belief, now become part of a more complex understanding, where their meaning is reconsidered in light of new information, illustrating how communication can be reinterpreted as context changes. As one continues to reflect on this stage, it becomes clear that the transition from belief to uncertainty is not abrupt, but gradual, shaped by the accumulation of small changes that collectively alter the way events are understood. The system, while capable of shaping perception, for a time ultimately exists within a reality that cannot be fully controlled, and as that reality becomes more apparent, the narrative that once defined understanding begins to shift, revealing the gap between perception and experience. As one continues to explore this moment where perception begins to shift, it becomes increasingly clear that the realization of discrepancy between what was believed and what was occurring does not arrive uniformly or simultaneously for all individuals, but instead unfolds in different ways depending on access to information, personal experience, and the context in which that information is interpreted, creating a varied and often fragmented process of understanding. The letters, which once served as a source of reassurance, take on a different significance when viewed through this emerging awareness, as their content is reconsidered not only for what it says, but for what it does not say, highlighting the limitations and constraints under which they were written. As one reflects on this reinterpretation, it becomes evident that meaning is not fixed, but evolves as new context becomes available, allowing the same message to be understood in different ways over time. The absence of continued communication, combined with the presence of inconsistencies, would gradually lead individuals to question the assumptions they had previously accepted, initiating a process of inquiry that seeks to reconcile the gap between expectation and observation. As one considers this process, it becomes clear that it involves both cognitive and emotional elements, as individuals attempt to understand not only what has happened, but also how their understanding has been shaped by the information they received. The role of community in this stage remains significant, as shared experiences and discussions contribute to the formation of a collective awareness, where individual insights are combined to create a broader understanding of events. As one reflects on this collective process, it becomes evident that it can lead to the emergence of new narratives that replace or challenge the original one, illustrating how perception can shift when new information becomes available. The recognition that earlier messages did not fully represent reality introduces a sense of complexity to the historical understanding of these events, as it highlights the interplay between communication, perception, and context, demonstrating how each element influences the others. As one considers the broader implications of this realization, it becomes clear that the system that once shaped belief relied on conditions that could not be maintained indefinitely, and that the eventual emergence of new information would alter the framework through which events were understood. The letters, therefore, remain significant not only as historical documents, but as examples of how communication can be influenced by context and control, illustrating both the power and the limitations of narrative in shaping perception. Chapter 4. The Human Side of the Letters. Segment 1. Writing to be Remembered. As one begins to move beyond the structure and function of these letters and instead focuses on the individuals who wrote them, it becomes evident that each message, despite the constraints under which it was created, carried a deeply personal intention, shaped not only by external influence but by the inner need to be remembered, to remain connected, and to leave behind something that would endure beyond the uncertainty of the present moment. The act of writing, even when limited to a few lines on a postcard, would represent a moment of pause, a brief return to identity in an environment where individuality was often reduced or controlled, and as one reflects on this act, it becomes clear that the decision of what to write, how to phrase it, and what To include would carry emotional weight far beyond the physical size of the message. The individuals composing these letters were not only responding to instructions, but also engaging in a form of communication that connected them to their past, to the people they cared about, and to a sense of self that extended beyond the immediate conditions surrounding them. As one considers this connection, it becomes evident that the letters functioned as more than simple updates. They became a means of preserving relationships, maintaining a presence in the lives of others, and asserting a form of continuity in a situation defined by disruption. The limitations placed on these letters, including restricted space and controlled content, would shape how this intention was expressed, leading to messages that were often brief and carefully worded. Yet, within those constraints, individuals would attempt to convey something meaningful, whether through tone, choice of words, or subtle emphasis. As one reflects on these attempts, it becomes clear that even within a controlled system, there exists a space for personal expression, however limited, and that this expression carries significance for both the sender and the receiver. The recipients of these letters, reading them in a different context, would interpret them not only as information but as a continuation of the relationship they shared with the sender, finding meaning in the words that extended beyond their literal content. As one considers this interpretive process, it becomes evident that the emotional connection between sender and receiver plays a central role in shaping how the letters are understood, allowing them to carry a depth of meaning that cannot be fully captured by the text alone. The act of writing, therefore, becomes a moment in which the individual asserts their presence, their voice, and their connection to others, even within an environment that limits their ability to do so. As one reflects on the significance of this act, it becomes clear that the letters represent not only a form of communication, but a statement of existence, a way of saying, in the simplest terms, that the writer is still there, still connected, still part of a world beyond the immediate surroundings. The knowledge that the letter would be read by someone who knew them personally would further shape what was written. As individuals considered how their words would be received, what they might convey, and what they might leave unsaid. As one considers this awareness, it becomes evident that the letters were composed with both intention and limitation, balancing the desire to communicate with the need to conform to the conditions under which the communication was allowed. The result is a form of expression that is both constrained and meaningful, where each word carries weight not only for what it says, but for what it represents in the context of the writer's experience. As one continues to reflect on this aspect, it becomes clear that the letters offer insight into the human dimension of these events, revealing how individuals navigate complex and constrained environments while maintaining a sense of identity and connection. The act of writing in this context becomes a way of reaching beyond the immediate moment, creating a link between past, present, and future, and leaving behind a trace of existence that endures even when circumstances change. As one continues to explore the human dimension of these letters, it becomes increasingly clear that the act of writing was not only about communication but also about meaning, about finding a way to express something that could endure, even when the future remained uncertain and the present offered little clarity. The individuals who wrote these messages were, in many cases, navigating a space between what they understood and what they did not, relying on the act of writing as a way to anchor themselves within that uncertainty. And as one reflects on this role, it becomes evident that the letters served as a form of emotional and psychological grounding, allowing individuals to connect with something familiar and stable. The process of composing a message, even under constraints, would involve choices: what to include, what to emphasize, what to omit, and these choices would reflect not only the external conditions but also the internal priorities of the writer, revealing what they considered important enough to communicate within the limited space available. As one considers these decisions, it becomes clear that the letters provide insight into the values, relationships, and perspectives of those who wrote them, offering a glimpse into how individuals understood their situation and what they wished to convey. To others, the recipients, in turn, would interpret these messages through their own experiences and expectations, finding meaning not only in the words themselves, but in the context of their relationship with the sender. And as one reflects on this interpretive process, it becomes evident that the letters function as a form of shared understanding, where meaning is created through the interaction between sender and receiver. The emotional resonance of these messages would extend beyond their immediate context, influencing how they were remembered and understood over time, particularly when viewed in light of later knowledge about the events surrounding them. As one considers this retrospective perspective, it becomes clear that the letters carry layers of meaning that evolve as context changes, transforming from simple messages into historical documents that reflect both the conditions under which they were written and the broader system within which they existed. The act of writing, therefore, becomes a moment that bridges individual experience and collective history, connecting personal expression with larger narratives in ways that are both direct and indirect. The limitations imposed on these letters do not diminish their significance. Rather, they highlight the complexity of communication under constrained conditions, where meaning must be conveyed within boundaries that shape and sometimes restrict expression. As one continues to reflect on this aspect, it becomes evident that the letters reveal not only the structure of the system in which they were written, but also the resilience of human expression within that system, illustrating how individuals find ways to communicate, connect, and create meaning even in the most limited circumstances. Segment 2: Words between the lines. As one begins to look more closely at the subtle ways meaning could be conveyed within these letters, it becomes evident that communication did not rely solely on what was directly written, but also on what could be suggested, implied, or carefully positioned within the limited space allowed, creating a form of expression that operated between the lines where tone, phrasing, and even structure carried significance beyond their immediate appearance. The constraints placed on these messages, including restricted content and oversight, would encourage individuals to think carefully about how they communicated, leading to a form of writing that balanced clarity with restraint. And as one reflects on this balance, it becomes clear that even small variations in wording could carry meaning for those familiar with the writer's voice and style. The recipients of these letters, often deeply connected to the sender, would read them not only for their literal content, but for the nuances that might reveal more than what was explicitly stated, interpreting the message through the lens of personal knowledge, shared experiences, and emotional connection. As one considers this interpretive process, it becomes evident that communication in this context was not a one-way transmission of information, but a shared act of understanding, where both sender and receiver contributed to the meaning of the message. The use of certain phrases, the omission of expected details, or the presence of subtle emphasis could all serve as indicators that something lay beneath the surface, and as one reflects on these possibilities, it becomes clear that the letters allowed for a form of expression that, while constrained, was not entirely devoid of personal intention. The individuals writing these messages may not have had the freedom to describe their situation openly, yet within the limitations they could still make choices that shaped how their words were perceived, whether consciously or instinctively. As one considers the role of instinct in communication, it becomes evident that people often rely on familiar patterns and habits when expressing themselves, and these patterns can carry meaning even when the content is restricted, allowing elements of personality and perspective to emerge. Through subtle cues, the recipients, attuned to these patterns, would interpret the letters with an awareness that extended beyond the written words, seeking to understand what the sender might be trying to convey within the limits imposed upon them. As one reflects on this dynamic, it becomes clear that the letters functioned as a form of layered communication, where meaning existed at multiple levels, shaped by both the constraints of the environment and the connection between sender and receiver. The absence of explicit detail, rather than diminishing the message, could in some cases enhance its significance, prompting the reader to consider what might be implied rather than stated, and as one considers this effect, it becomes evident that silence within communication can be as meaningful as speech. The interplay between what is written and what is understood creates a space in which interpretation becomes an active process, requiring the reader to engage with the message in a way that goes beyond simple comprehension. As one continues to reflect on this aspect, it becomes clear that the letters reveal not only the limitations of communication under control but also the adaptability of human expression, illustrating how individuals find ways to convey meaning even when direct expression is restricted. The words between the lines, therefore, become an essential part of the message, offering insight into how communication can operate within boundaries while still retaining depth and significance. As one continues to explore the idea of meaning existing between the lines, it becomes increasingly clear that this form of communication relies heavily on the relationship between sender and receiver, where shared history, familiarity, and emotional connection provide the context necessary to interpret subtle cues, and as one reflects on this relationship, it becomes evident that the letters cannot be fully understood without considering the individuals involved in their exchange. The sender, aware of the recipient's knowledge and expectations, would shape the message in a way that aligns with that understanding, even within the constraints imposed upon them, and as one considers this awareness, it becomes clear that communication is not only about conveying information, but about anticipating how that information will be received. The recipient, in turn, would approach the letter with their own expectations and experiences, interpreting the message through a lens that includes both what is written and what is known about the sender, creating a dynamic in which meaning is co-created rather than simply transmitted. As one reflects on this co-creation of meaning, it becomes evident that the letters function as a form of dialogue, even in the absence of immediate response, where each message contributes to an ongoing exchange of understanding. The limitations placed on these letters would not eliminate this dialogue, but rather shape it, encouraging a form of communication that is more nuanced and indirect, yet still capable of conveying depth and emotion. As one considers the adaptability required for such communication, it becomes clear that individuals are capable of adjusting their methods of expression to fit the conditions in which they find themselves, finding ways to maintain connection even when direct communication is restricted. The emotional significance of this connection would further influence how messages are written and interpreted, as both sender and receiver seek to preserve a sense of relationship in the face of uncertainty. As one reflects on the role of emotion, it becomes evident that it can amplify the meaning of even the simplest words, allowing them to carry weight beyond their literal content. The passage of time would add another layer to this process, as the letters are read and reread, interpreted and reinterpreted, with meaning evolving as context changes and new information becomes available. As one considers this temporal dimension, it becomes clear that the letters are not static documents, but living pieces of communication that continue to carry significance long after they are written. The recognition that meaning can exist beyond what is explicitly stated highlights the complexity of communication under constrained conditions, illustrating how individuals navigate limitations while still seeking to express themselves and connect with others. Segment 3. The Last Connection. As one begins to reflect on the final dimension of these letters, it becomes evident that beyond structure, control, and interpretation, they represented something deeply human, a final connection, a fragile thread that linked individuals to the lives they had been taken from, carrying with it memory, identity, and the quiet persistence of relationships that continued to exist even in the most constrained conditions. The act of writing, though limited in space and shaped by external forces, created a moment in which the individual could reach outward, beyond the immediate environment, toward someone who existed in a different world, and as one reflects on this act, it becomes clear that it held significance not only as communication but as a reaffirmation of connection. The individuals who wrote these letters were not writing into emptiness. They were writing to people who knew them, who understood their voice, their habits, their way of expressing themselves, and this familiarity would influence how the message was composed, even within the constraints that limited its content. As one considers this familiarity, it becomes evident that the letters carried more than information. They carried presence, a sense that the person writing was still there, still connected, still part of a shared history that extended beyond the immediate circumstances. The recipients reading these messages would not only process the words, but also imagine the person behind them, reconstructing their presence through memory and interpretation, and as one reflects on this process, it becomes clear that the letters functioned as a bridge between two realities, allowing connection to persist across distance and separation. The brevity of the messages would intensify this effect, as each word carried weight, chosen carefully within limited space, and as one considers this concentration of meaning, it becomes evident that even the simplest phrases could hold deep significance when understood within the context of a relationship. The emotional dimension of this connection cannot be separated from the act of writing itself, as the desire to communicate with loved ones, to reassure them, to maintain a sense of continuity, would shape both the content and tone of the message. As one reflects on this emotional motivation, it becomes clear that the letters were not only responses to instruction, but expressions of care, of concern, of the enduring need to remain connected to others. The constraints under which these letters were written did not eliminate this need. Rather, they shaped how it was expressed, resulting in messages that are both limited and meaningful, where each line reflects a balance between what could be said and what needed to be conveyed. As one considers the significance of this balance, it becomes evident that the letters reveal the resilience of human connection, illustrating how relationships can persist even when communication is restricted. The recipients holding these letters would find in them a sense of presence that extended beyond the physical page, allowing them to maintain a connection to the sender even in the absence of further communication. As one reflects on this enduring connection, it becomes clear that the letters served as more than temporary messages. They became lasting links, objects that carried memory and meaning over time. The eventual absence of new letters would not immediately sever this connection, as the existing messages would continue to be read, remembered, and interpreted, sustaining the sense of relationship even in silence. As one considers this persistence, it becomes evident that the letters functioned as anchors of memory, preserving a connection that might otherwise have been lost. And as one continues to reflect on this aspect, it becomes clear that the true significance of these letters lies not only in what they communicate, but in what they preserve, the presence of individuals within the lives of those who received their words. As one continues to reflect on the idea of these letters as the last connection, it becomes increasingly clear that their meaning extends beyond the moment of writing and receiving, evolving over time as they are preserved, remembered, and understood within a broader historical and emotional context, transforming from simple messages into lasting symbols of connection, memory, and human expression. The individuals who received these letters would often keep them, storing them among personal belongings, returning to them repeatedly, finding in them a sense of continuity that persisted even as circumstances changed. And as one reflects on this act of preservation, it becomes evident that the letters took on a role that extended beyond their original purpose, becoming objects that carried emotional significance and historical meaning. The passage of time would alter how these letters were understood, as new information became available and the broader context of events was revealed, leading to a reinterpretation of the messages and a deeper awareness of the conditions under which they were written. As one considers this shift in understanding, it becomes clear that the letters exist at the intersection of personal experience and historical knowledge, carrying layers of meaning that evolve as context changes. The words, once read as simple updates or reassurances, may later be seen in a different light, revealing the complexity of communication under constrained conditions and highlighting the gap between perception and reality. As one reflects on this reinterpretation, it becomes evident that the letters serve as reminders of how meaning is shaped not only by content, but by context, illustrating how the same message can carry different significance depending on the knowledge available to the reader. The emotional impact of these letters, preserved over time, would continue to influence how they are remembered and understood, as the connection they represent remains meaningful even as the circumstances surrounding them become part of history. As one considers the enduring nature of this connection, it becomes clear that the letters function as a form of continuity, linking past and present through the preservation of personal expression. The act of writing, therefore, extends beyond the immediate moment, creating a lasting record that continues to communicate across time, offering insight into both the individuals who wrote the letters and the environment in which they lived. As one reflects on the broader implications of this continuity, it becomes evident that the letters represent more than isolated pieces of communication. They are part of a larger narrative that connects individual experiences to collective memory, illustrating how personal expression contributes to the understanding of history. Chapter 5. After the letters. Segment 1. What remains? As one begins to consider what remains after the letters themselves, the paper, the ink, the carefully chosen words, it becomes evident that their significance extends far beyond the moment in which they were written, transforming over time into fragments of memory that carry both personal and historical meaning, bridging the gap between individual experience and collective understanding. The physical presence of these letters, preserved in drawers, boxes, archives, and institutions, represents more than documentation. It represents continuity, connection between those who wrote them and those who continue to read them, and as one reflects on this continuity, it becomes clear that the letters serve as tangible links to moments that might otherwise be lost to time. The handwriting, the phrasing, the structure of each message. These elements carry traces of the individual, offering insight into their identity, their intentions, and the conditions under which they wrote. And as one considers these traces, it becomes evident that the letters function as personal artifacts, capturing not only what was communicated, but how it was expressed. The preservation of these letters allows for a form of communication that extends across generations, enabling individuals who were not present at the time to engage with the experiences of those who were, and as one reflects on this intergenerational connection, it becomes clear that the letters contribute to a broader understanding of history by providing perspectives that are both specific and deeply human. The context in which these letters are read would influence their interpretation, as modern readers bring with them knowledge that was not available to the original recipients, creating a layered understanding in which past and present perspectives intersect. As one considers this layering, it becomes evident that the meaning of the letters is not fixed, but evolves over time, shaped by the knowledge and perspective of each new reader. The emotional impact of these letters, particularly when viewed in light of later events, adds another dimension to their significance, as the awareness of what followed introduces a depth of meaning that extends beyond the original content. As one reflects on this emotional dimension, it becomes clear that the letters serve as reminders of the complexity of human experience, illustrating how communication can carry both immediate and enduring significance. The act of preservation itself reflects a recognition of this importance, as individuals and institutions have taken steps to ensure that these letters are not lost, but maintained as part of a broader effort to document and understand the past. As one considers the role of preservation, it becomes evident that it is not merely about maintaining physical objects, but about sustaining the connections and meanings they represent, allowing them to continue to inform and influence understanding over time. The letters, therefore, become part of a larger narrative, contributing to the collective memory of events and providing insight into the ways in which individuals experienced and responded to their circumstances. As one continues to reflect on what remains, it becomes clear that the letters are more than remnants of communication. They are enduring expressions of human connection, carrying with them the voices of those who wrote them and offering a means through which those voices can continue to be heard. The passage of time does not diminish their significance. Rather, it adds to it as each generation encounters these letters, with new perspectives and questions, finding in them not only information, but a connection to the past that remains relevant in the present. As one continues to reflect on what remains after the letters, it becomes increasingly clear that their significance lies not only in their preservation, but in how they are understood, interpreted, and integrated into a broader awareness of history, where individual messages contribute to a larger narrative that extends beyond the experiences of any one person. The letters, when viewed collectively, reveal patterns of communication, shared themes, and common constraints, offering insight into the environment in which they were written and the conditions that shaped their content. As one considers these patterns, it becomes evident that the letters provide a window into a system that influenced how individuals communicated and how their messages were perceived, illustrating the relationship between personal expression and structural context. The interpretation of these letters requires an awareness of both their content and their limitations, recognizing that what is written reflects not only the intentions of the writer, but also the conditions under which the writing took place. As one reflects on this dual influence, it becomes clear that understanding the letters involves looking beyond their surface meaning, considering the broader context in which they exist and the factors that shaped their creation. The role of historians, researchers, and readers in interpreting these letters adds another layer to their significance, as each interpretation contributes to the ongoing process of understanding the past, and as one considers this process, it becomes evident that the letters function as active elements within historical inquiry, prompting questions, insights, and reflections that extend beyond their original purpose. The emotional resonance of these letters continues to play a role in how they are understood, as the connection they represent remains meaningful even as the context in which they were written becomes part of history. As one reflects on this enduring resonance, it becomes clear that the letters serve as reminders of the human dimension of historical events, illustrating how individuals navigated their circumstances and sought to maintain connection and meaning within them. The integration of these letters into broader narratives of history allows for a more nuanced understanding of events, one that incorporates both structural analysis and personal experience, and as one considers this integration, it becomes evident that the letters contribute to a more complete and balanced perspective. The act of reading these letters today, therefore, becomes more than an exercise in historical observation. It becomes an engagement with the past that involves both intellectual and emotional dimensions, allowing readers to connect with the experiences of others in a way that is both immediate and reflective. As one continues to reflect on this engagement, it becomes clear that what remains after the letters is not only their physical presence, but their capacity to inform, connect, and resonate across time, serving as enduring links between past and present, individual and collective memory and understanding. Segment 2, Reading Them Today. As one begins to consider what it means to read these letters in the present day, it becomes evident that the experience is shaped not only by the words themselves, but by the knowledge, context, and perspective that modern readers bring to them, creating a layered understanding in which past and present intersect in ways that are both complex and deeply meaningful. The individuals who originally received these letters read them within a context defined by limited information, interpreting them as direct reflections of the writer's situation, yet today those same letters are approached with an awareness of events that were not visible at the time, and as one reflects on this difference, it becomes clear that the act of reading has fundamentally changed. The words on the page remain the same, yet their meaning evolves as new context is applied, transforming simple statements into pieces of a larger historical narrative that carries both informational and emotional weight. As one considers this transformation, it becomes evident that the letters function as more than historical documents. They become points of connection through which readers engage with the past, attempting to understand not only what was written, but the circumstances under which it was written and the intentions behind it. The process of interpretation, therefore, involves a balance between respecting the original context of the letter and integrating the broader knowledge that has since become available, creating a dynamic in which meaning is both preserved and expanded. As one reflects on this balance, it becomes clear that reading these letters today requires an awareness of their dual nature, recognizing them as both personal communications and elements of a larger historical system. The emotional dimension of this experience is significant, as modern readers often approach these letters with an understanding of outcomes that the writers themselves did not possess, and as one considers this asymmetry of knowledge, it becomes evident that it adds a layer of poignancy to the reading process where the gap between what was known then and what is known now shapes the way the message is received. The tone of reassurance or normality present in many of these letters, when viewed in this context, takes on additional meaning, prompting readers to consider not only the content of the message, but the conditions that influenced its creation. As one reflects on these conditions, it becomes clear that the letters offer insight into how individuals navigated uncertainty, using the act of writing as a way to maintain connection and meaning within a constrained environment. The act of reading these letters, therefore, becomes an engagement with both the text and its context, requiring the reader to move beyond surface interpretation and consider the broader factors that shaped the message. The preservation of these letters in archives, museums, and personal collections allows for this engagement to continue, providing access to materials that serve as direct links to individual experiences within a larger historical framework. As one considers the role of preservation in enabling this connection, it becomes evident that it supports an ongoing dialogue between past and present, where each reading contributes to a deeper understanding of the letters and the events surrounding them. The act of reading, in this sense, becomes a form of reflection, where the reader not only absorbs information, but also considers its implications, both for understanding history and for recognizing the ways in which communication can be shaped by context. As one continues to reflect on this process, it becomes clear that reading these letters today is not a passive activity, but an active engagement with the past, where meaning is constructed through a combination of textual analysis, contextual awareness, and emotional response, illustrating the enduring significance of these messages as both historical and human artifacts. As one continues to reflect on the experience of reading these letters in the present, it becomes increasingly clear that the process involves not only understanding the past, but also recognizing the ways in which interpretation itself evolves over time, influenced by new research, changing perspectives, and a growing awareness of the broader historical context in which these letters exist. The individuals who first preserved and studied these letters approached them with a particular set of questions and assumptions, shaped by the knowledge available at the time, and as one considers this early stage of interpretation, it becomes evident that it laid the foundation for subsequent analysis, providing initial insights that would later be expanded upon. Over time, as additional information has emerged and as historical methodologies have developed, the understanding of these letters has become more nuanced, incorporating a wider range of perspectives and a deeper awareness of the conditions under which they were written. As one reflects on this evolution, it becomes clear that the meaning of these letters is not static, but continues to develop as new layers of context are added, illustrating how historical understanding is shaped by an ongoing process of inquiry and reinterpretation. The role of the reader in this process is significant, as each individual brings their own perspective to the act of reading, influenced by their background, knowledge, and emotional response, and as one considers this diversity of interpretation, it becomes evident that the letters can be understood in multiple ways, each offering insight into different aspects of their significance. The emotional dimension of this engagement remains central, as the connection between sender and receiver, preserved within the text, continues to resonate with readers, creating a sense of immediacy that bridges the gap between past and present. As one reflects on this emotional resonance, it becomes clear that it plays a crucial role in shaping how the letters are perceived and remembered, contributing to their enduring impact as both historical documents and expressions of human experience. The integration of these letters into educational and cultural contexts further extends their reach, allowing them to inform not only individual understanding, but also collective memory, as they are shared, discussed, and analyzed within broader frameworks of learning and reflection. As one considers the role of these contexts, it becomes evident that they provide opportunities for deeper engagement, encouraging readers to explore the complexities of communication, perception, and historical interpretation in ways that extend beyond the letters themselves. The act of reading these letters today, therefore, becomes part of a larger process of engagement with history, where the past is not simply observed, but actively explored and understood through the interaction between text, context, and reader. Segment 3: Memory, Meaning, and What Endures. As one begins to consider what ultimately endures after the letters have been written, sent, received, preserved, and later rediscovered, it becomes evident that their significance extends far beyond their original purpose, transforming over time into carriers of memory that bridge the distance between past and present, allowing individual experiences to continue influencing understanding long after the moment of writing has passed. The letters, once simple acts of communication, become part of a broader process through which memory is formed, preserved, and transmitted, contributing to a collective awareness that is shaped not only by large historical events but by the small, personal details that reveal how those events were experienced on an individual level. As one reflects on this transformation, it becomes clear that memory is not a fixed record, but a dynamic process in which meaning is constructed through the interaction of personal experience, preserved artifacts, and ongoing interpretation. The letters, in this context, function as anchors within this process, providing points of reference that ground memory in tangible evidence while also allowing for the exploration of meaning beyond what is explicitly stated. The handwriting, the phrasing, the tone. These elements carry traces of the individual, offering insight into how they understood their situation and how they chose to communicate within the constraints they faced. And as one considers these traces, it becomes evident that the letters preserve not only information but presence, a sense of the person behind the words that continues to resonate with those who encounter them. The act of reading these letters, therefore, becomes an engagement with memory itself, where the reader is invited to consider not only the content of the message, but the context in which it was created and the journey it has taken to reach the present moment. As one reflects on this journey, it becomes clear that the letters carry with them layers of meaning that have accumulated over time, shaped by the circumstances of their creation, the experiences of those who received them, and the interpretations of those who study them today. The preservation of these letters within archives, museums, and personal collections ensures that they remain accessible, allowing future generations to engage with them and to contribute to the ongoing process of understanding and interpretation. As one considers the role of preservation in this process, it becomes evident that it is not simply about maintaining physical objects but about sustaining the connections and meanings they represent, allowing them to continue to inform and influence how the past is understood. The letters, therefore, become part of a larger narrative, contributing to a collective memory that is both shaped by and reflective of individual experiences. As one continues to reflect on what endures, it becomes clear that the significance of these letters lies not only in what they reveal about the past, but in how they continue to shape understanding in the present, illustrating the enduring impact of communication as a means of preserving memory and meaning across time. As one continues to explore the enduring significance of these letters, it becomes increasingly clear that their role extends beyond memory into the realm of meaning, where they contribute to an ongoing process of reflection and understanding that connects individual experiences to broader historical narratives, allowing for a more nuanced and comprehensive perspective on the past. The letters, when considered collectively, reveal patterns and themes that provide insight into the conditions under which they were written, illustrating how individuals navigated their circumstances and sought to maintain connection and identity within a constrained environment. As one reflects on these patterns, it becomes evident that the letters serve as both individual expressions and components of a larger system, offering a dual perspective that highlights the interaction between personal experience and structural context. The interpretation of these letters requires an awareness of this duality, recognizing that their meaning is shaped by both what is written and the conditions that influence their creation, and as one considers this complexity, it becomes clear that understanding the letters involves engaging with multiple layers of context, each contributing to a more complete picture of their significance. The emotional resonance of these letters continues to play a central role in how they are perceived and understood, as the connection they represent between individuals remains meaningful even as the events surrounding them become part of history. As one reflects on this emotional dimension, it becomes evident that it contributes to the enduring impact of the letters, allowing them to resonate with readers across different contexts and time periods. The integration of these letters into educational, cultural, and historical frameworks further extends their influence, providing opportunities for individuals to engage with them in ways that deepen understanding and encourage reflection. As one considers the role of these frameworks, it becomes clear that they facilitate a broader engagement with the letters, allowing them to be studied, discussed, and interpreted within a range of contexts that contribute to a more comprehensive understanding of their significance. The act of engaging with these letters, whether through reading, analysis, or reflection, becomes part of a larger process of connecting with the past, where the experiences of individuals are brought into dialogue with contemporary perspectives, creating a space in which understanding can evolve and expand. Chapter 6. The Mechanics of Deception. Segment 1. Building a System of Trust. As one begins to examine how such a system of communication could function so effectively, over time it becomes evident that its foundation rested not only on control, but on the careful construction of trust, where familiar actions and recognizable patterns were used to create a sense of reliability that extended beyond the immediate environment, shaping how individuals interpreted both what they saw and what they were told. The act of writing letters, something deeply rooted in everyday life, was not introduced as something unusual or alarming, but rather presented as a continuation of normal behavior, allowing individuals to engage with it without immediately questioning its purpose, and as one reflects on this familiarity, it becomes clear that trust often begins with what is known, with actions that feel consistent with prior experience. The individuals who were asked to write these letters did so within a framework that appeared structured and organized, with materials provided, instructions given, and processes that resembled administrative routines, and as one considers this environment, it becomes evident that the presence of structure can create an impression of order, even when the underlying reality is far more complex. The perception of order would influence how individuals understood their situation, leading them to interpret the act of writing as part of a larger system that, while unfamiliar, still operated according to recognizable rules, and as one reflects on this interpretation, it becomes clear that the existence of rules and routines can reinforce trust by providing a sense of predictability. The recipients of these letters, reading them within the context of their own lives, would also rely on familiar patterns to interpret the messages, recognizing the format, the tone, and the act of communication itself as something that aligned with their expectations, and as one considers this alignment, it becomes evident that trust is reinforced when new information fits within existing frameworks of understanding. The repetition of similar messages across different letters would further strengthen this trust, creating consistency that made the narrative appear stable and reliable, and as one reflects on this repetition, it becomes clear that consistency is a key factor in maintaining belief, allowing individuals to accept information with less need for verification. The absence of conflicting information would also play a significant role, as the lack of alternative perspectives limited the opportunity for doubt to emerge, and as one considers this absence, it becomes evident that trust can be sustained not only by the presence of confirming evidence, but by the absence of contradiction. The system, therefore, relied on a combination of familiarity, structure, repetition, and controlled information to build and maintain trust, creating an environment in which individuals could engage with communication in a way that felt natural and credible. As one continues to reflect on this process, it becomes clear that the effectiveness of the system was not solely the result of direct control, but of its ability to align with the expectations and experiences of those within it, illustrating how trust can be constructed through the careful integration of familiar elements into a controlled environment. The letters, in this context, become more than messages. They become instruments through which trust is established and maintained, shaping how individuals understand their situation and how they respond to it. The act of writing and receiving these letters reinforces a sense of continuity, suggesting that communication, and by extension life itself, continues in a recognizable form, and as one reflects on this continuity, it becomes evident that it plays a crucial role in sustaining belief over time. The individuals participating in this system, whether as writers or recipients, engage with it through the lens of trust, interpreting the information available to them in ways that align with their expectations, and as one considers this engagement, it becomes clear that trust is not imposed directly, but emerges through the interaction between familiar patterns and controlled communication. The system, therefore, demonstrates how perception can be shaped not only by what is presented, but by how it is presented, illustrating the subtle ways in which trust can be built and maintained within a structured environment. As one continues to explore the foundations of this system of trust, it becomes increasingly clear that its strength depended not only on external factors such as structure and repetition, but also on internal processes of interpretation, where individuals actively constructed their understanding of events based on the information available to them, filling in gaps with assumptions that aligned with their expectations and experiences. The letters provided a framework within which this interpretation could take place, offering a narrative that appeared coherent and consistent, and as one reflects on this coherence, it becomes evident that people tend to favor explanations that make sense within their existing understanding, integrating new information in ways that reinforce, rather than challenge what they already believe. The act of writing these letters would also contribute to this process, as individuals, in framing their experience for others, would organize their thoughts in a way that aligns with the narrative being presented, and as one considers this act of organization, it becomes clear that communication is not only about conveying information, but about shaping how that information is understood, both by the sender and the receiver. The recipients, in turn, would interpret these messages through their own frameworks, relying on the trust they placed in the sender to guide their understanding, and as one reflects on this reliance, it becomes evident that trust is reinforced through relationships, where the credibility of the message is tied to the credibility of the person delivering it. The repetition of communication across multiple individuals and contexts would further strengthen this trust, creating a network of messages that support one another, and as one considers this network, it becomes clear that belief is often sustained through collective reinforcement, where shared understanding becomes more resilient than individual interpretation. The absence of alternative sources of information would also contribute to this process, as the lack of competing narratives limited the ability of individuals to question or reinterpret what they were told, and as one reflects on this limitation, it becomes evident that the availability of information plays a crucial role in shaping perception. The system, therefore, operated not only by providing information, but by shaping the conditions under which that information was received and interpreted, creating an environment in which trust could be maintained even in the absence of complete knowledge. As one continues to reflect on this dynamic, it becomes clear that the construction of trust within this system was a complex process involving both external control and internal interpretation, illustrating how perception can be shaped through the interaction of multiple factors. Segment 2. Repetition, routine, and reinforcement. As one continues to examine how this system maintained its effectiveness over time, it becomes evident that repetition and routine played a central role, creating a predictable rhythm that reinforced the narrative being presented and reduced the likelihood of doubt emerging within the minds of those who experienced or observed it. The act of writing letters was not a one-time occurrence, but part of a repeated process where similar instructions, formats, and expectations were encountered again and again, and as one reflects on this repetition, it becomes clear that familiarity grows through exposure, allowing individuals to become accustomed to patterns that might otherwise seem unusual. The repetition of communication, particularly when it follows a consistent structure, creates a sense of normality where the act itself becomes expected and unremarkable, and as one considers this normalization, it becomes evident that routine has the power to shape perception by transforming what is initially unfamiliar into something that feels stable and predictable. The individuals participating in this process, whether writing or receiving letters, would gradually adapt to these routines, integrating them into their understanding of how the system operated, and as one reflects on this adaptation, it becomes clear that repeated experiences can influence not only behavior, but also interpretation, guiding how individuals make sense of their environment. The structure of the letters themselves would contribute to this process, as the use of similar language, tone, and content across multiple messages would reinforce the narrative, creating consistency that made the information appear reliable. And as one considers the role of consistency, it becomes evident that it is a key factor in building and maintaining belief, allowing individuals to accept information with less need for verification. The absence of significant variation in these messages would further strengthen this effect, as the lack of contradiction or divergence would limit the opportunity for alternative interpretations to emerge, and as one reflects on this uniformity, it becomes clear that it supports the stability of the narrative by reducing uncertainty. The routine surrounding communication would extend beyond The letters themselves, encompassing the processes through which they were written, collected, and delivered, creating a system in which each step followed a predictable pattern, and as one considers this broader routine, it becomes evident that the consistency of the process reinforces the credibility of the outcome, suggesting that the system operates in an orderly and reliable manner. The recipients of these letters, observing this consistency over time, would interpret it as evidence of stability, reinforcing their trust in the information being conveyed, and as one reflects on this interpretation, it becomes clear that repetition not only reinforces belief but also shapes expectation, guiding how individuals anticipate future communication. The absence of abrupt changes within this system would further contribute to its effectiveness, as gradual or minimal variation allows the narrative to persist without drawing attention to potential inconsistencies. And, as one considers the importance of gradual change, it becomes evident that it enables the system to adapt without disrupting the perception it has created. The interplay between repetition, routine, and reinforcement creates a dynamic in which belief is continuously supported by experience, illustrating how patterns of behavior and communication can shape understanding over time. As one continues to reflect on this process, it becomes clear that the system's strength lies not in any single element, but in the cumulative effect of repeated actions and consistent messaging, demonstrating how perception can be maintained through the careful alignment of structure, communication, and expectation. As one continues to explore the role of repetition and routine within this system, it becomes increasingly clear that their effectiveness is closely tied to the way in which they influence not only conscious thought but also subconscious expectation, shaping how individuals perceive and respond to information without requiring constant active analysis. The repeated exposure to similar messages, structures, and processes would create a sense of familiarity that operates beneath the level of deliberate consideration, allowing individuals to accept patterns as normal, without questioning their origin or purpose. And as one reflects on this subconscious influence, it becomes evident that repetition can shape perception in ways that are both subtle and enduring. The predictability of routine would further support this process, as individuals come to rely on consistent patterns to navigate their environment, using them as reference points that guide their understanding of what is happening and what is likely to happen next. As one considers the role of predictability, it becomes clear that it provides a sense of stability that can be particularly influential in uncertain situations, allowing individuals to form expectations that reduce the need for constant reassessment. The letters, as part of this routine, would reinforce these expectations by providing consistent messages that align with the established narrative. And as one reflects on this alignment, it becomes evident that the repetition of similar themes across multiple communications strengthens the overall perception of reliability. The absence of conflicting information would further enhance this effect, as the lack of alternative perspectives limits the opportunity for doubt to arise, and as one considers the impact of this absence, it becomes clear that it allows the narrative to remain dominant, shaping how individuals interpret both the information they receive and the experiences they encounter. The cumulative effect of repetition and routine would create a framework within which belief is not only formed, but sustained, as each new instance of communication reinforces the patterns established by previous ones, creating a continuous cycle of confirmation. As one reflects on this cycle, it becomes evident that it contributes to the resilience of the narrative, making it more resistant to disruption even when new or conflicting information begins to emerge. The interaction between individual experience and collective understanding would further strengthen this resilience, as shared patterns of communication create a common framework through which groups interpret events. And as one considers this collective dimension, it becomes clear that repetition and routine operate not only at the individual level but also within social contexts, shaping how communities form and maintain shared beliefs. The system, therefore, demonstrates how the consistent application of routine and repetition can influence perception in profound ways, illustrating the importance of patterns in shaping both individual and collective understanding. Segment 3. When the system sustained itself. As one continues to follow the development of this system, it becomes increasingly clear that its most effective stage was reached when it no longer required constant direct reinforcement, when the patterns it had established through trust, repetition, and routine began to sustain themselves, creating a cycle in which perception was maintained not only by external control, but by the internal expectations and interpretations of those involved. The letters, once introduced as a controlled form of communication, had over time become part of a broader framework of understanding, where both senders and receivers operated within a shared set of assumptions that guided how information was produced, interpreted, and believed. As one reflects on this transition, it becomes evident that the system's strength lay in its ability to integrate itself into ordinary patterns of thought and behavior, making it less visible as a system and more accepted as a natural part of the environment. The individuals writing these letters, even when constrained by rules and oversight, would frame their messages in ways that aligned with the expectations that had already been established, reinforcing the narrative not only through what they were told to write, but through how they understood their own situation. As one considers this alignment, it becomes clear that the act of communication itself had been shaped to such an extent that it contributed to the maintenance of the system, illustrating how behavior can adapt to fit within a given framework over time. The recipients of these letters, in turn, would interpret them within the same framework, relying on familiar patterns and previous messages to guide their understanding, and as one reflects on this interpretation, it becomes evident that belief, once established, tends to reinforce itself as new information is filtered through existing assumptions. The repetition of similar messages, combined with the absence of contradictory information, would further strengthen this process, creating a situation in which the narrative remained consistent and credible without requiring constant external validation. As one considers the cumulative effect of these factors, it becomes clear that the system reached a point where it could operate with a degree of independence, sustained by the interactions between individuals who were both influenced by and contributors to the narrative. The role of community in this process would also be significant, as shared experiences and discussions reinforced the collective understanding, creating a network of belief that extended beyond individual communication. As one reflects on this communal dimension, it becomes evident that the system's effectiveness was amplified by its ability to operate at both individual and social levels, shaping perception through multiple channels simultaneously. The absence of abrupt change or disruption would allow this self-sustaining dynamic to persist, as gradual continuity reinforces stability, and as one considers the importance of continuity, it becomes clear that it plays a key role in maintaining belief over time. The letters, therefore, functioned as both products and instruments of this system, contributing to a cycle in which communication reinforced perception and perception guided communication, creating a feedback loop that sustained the narrative. As one continues to reflect on this stage, it becomes evident that the system's ability to sustain itself represents a critical point in its development, illustrating how patterns of behavior and communication can become deeply embedded within a framework of understanding, shaping perception in ways that persist even in the absence of direct control. As one continues to examine the implications of a system that sustains itself, it becomes increasingly clear that such a system operates not through constant enforcement, but through the internalization of its patterns, where individuals consciously or unconsciously adopt behaviors and interpretations that align with the established narrative, allowing the system to persist through their participation. The letters, as part of this process, become both expressions of individual experience and reflections of a broader framework that shapes how that experience is understood and communicated, and as one reflects on this dual role, it becomes evident that communication within such a system is influenced by both personal intention and collective expectation. The individuals writing these letters may not have been fully aware of the extent to which their messages contributed to the maintenance of the narrative, yet their participation, shaped by the conditions in which they operated, became part of a larger process that influenced how events were perceived beyond their immediate context. As one considers this participation, it becomes clear that systems of perception are not sustained by a single force, but by the interaction of multiple elements, including structure, communication, interpretation, and social reinforcement, all working together to maintain a consistent understanding. The recipients of these letters, interpreting them within the framework established by previous messages, would contribute to this process by accepting and reinforcing the narrative, sharing it within their communities, and integrating it into their expectations, and as one reflects on this contribution, it becomes evident that belief is often maintained through collective reinforcement, where shared understanding becomes more resilient than individual interpretation. The absence of direct contradiction within this system would allow it to persist, as the lack of opposing information limits the opportunity for doubt to emerge, and as one considers the importance of this absence, it becomes clear that control over information is as much about what is not communicated as what is shared. The eventual recognition, for those who later examined these events, that the system had been sustained through such mechanisms highlights the complexity of understanding how perception can be shaped and maintained, illustrating the interplay between individual experience and broader structures of influence. As one continues to reflect on this dynamic, it becomes clear that the self-sustaining nature of the system represents both its strength and its limitation, as it relies on conditions that, while effective for a time, cannot be maintained indefinitely in the face of changing circumstances and emerging information. Chapter 7. The Outside World. Segment 1. What People Believed. As one shifts focus from the environment in which the letters were written to the world in which they were received, it becomes evident that understanding how these messages were interpreted requires a careful consideration of the conditions that shaped belief outside the camps, where information was limited, fragmented, and often filtered through multiple layers before reaching individuals and communities trying to make sense of events that were unfolding beyond their immediate reach. The letters, arriving as tangible pieces of communication from those who had been deported, would naturally be given significant weight, not only because of their direct connection to loved ones, but also because they represented one of the few available sources of information about what was happening. As one reflects on this scarcity of information, it becomes clear that in such contexts, even limited or incomplete messages can take on heightened importance, filling gaps in understanding and shaping perception in ways that might not occur under conditions of greater transparency. The recipients of these letters, reading them within familiar environments and surrounded by the routines of daily life, would interpret them through the lens of their existing knowledge and expectations, relying on what they understood about the sender, about communication, and about the broader situation as they perceived it at the time. As one considers this interpretive process, it becomes evident that belief is often constructed through the integration of new information into existing frameworks, where individuals seek to make sense of what they encounter by relating it to what they already know. The tone of reassurance present in many of these letters would align with a natural desire to believe that those who had been deported were safe or at least managing, and as one reflects on this alignment, it becomes clear that belief is not only shaped by evidence, but also by hope, by the inclination to accept interpretations that preserve a sense of continuity and stability. The repetition of similar messages across different letters would further reinforce this perception, creating consistency that made the information appear reliable, and as one considers the role of consistency, it becomes evident that it strengthens belief by reducing uncertainty and providing a sense of confirmation. The absence of contradictory information would also play a significant role, as the lack of alternative perspectives limited the opportunity for doubt to emerge, allowing the narrative established by the letters to persist without significant challenge. As one reflects on this absence, it becomes clear that belief can be maintained not only through what is present, but through what is missing, where the lack of conflicting evidence allows existing interpretations to remain intact. The sharing of these letters within communities would amplify their impact as individuals discussed and interpreted them together, creating a collective understanding that extended beyond individual experience. As one considers this communal dimension, it becomes evident that belief is often reinforced through social interaction, where shared interpretations become more stable and resistant to change. The letters, therefore, functioned not only as individual communications, but as elements within a broader network of information that shaped how groups of people understood events. As one continues to reflect on this process, it becomes clear that the outside world, while physically distant from the camps, was nonetheless connected to them through these messages, with perception shaped by the information that was available and the context in which it was interpreted. The beliefs that emerged from this process were not the result of a single factor, but of the interaction between communication, expectation, and context, illustrating how understanding can be constructed in environments where information is limited and controlled. As one continues to explore how belief was formed in the outside world, it becomes increasingly clear that the process was influenced not only by the content of the letters, but by the broader environment in which they were received, including the social, cultural, and informational contexts that shaped how individuals interpreted and responded to what they read. The letters did not exist in isolation. They were part of a larger flow of information that included rumors, official statements, personal observations, and fragmented reports, each contributing to a complex and often incomplete picture of events. As one reflects on this complexity, it becomes evident that individuals seeking to understand their situation would draw upon multiple sources, weighing them against one another in an attempt to form a coherent narrative. And in this process, the letters, as direct communications from loved ones, would often carry a level of trust and credibility that other sources might lack. The emotional connection to the sender would further enhance this credibility, as individuals are more likely to trust information that comes from those they know personally, and as one considers this dynamic, it becomes clear that relationships play a crucial role in shaping belief, influencing how information is received and interpreted. The tone and content of the letters, often emphasizing normality and continuity, would align with a desire to maintain hope, reinforcing interpretations that suggest stability rather than disruption. And as one reflects on this alignment, it becomes evident that belief is not only shaped by information, but by the emotional context in which that information is received. The absence of clear and consistent alternative narratives would further support this process, as the lack of definitive information about what was happening would leave individuals reliant on the sources they had. And as one considers this reliance, it becomes clear that the availability of information plays a critical role in shaping understanding. The sharing and discussion of letters within communities would create a collective framework through which events were interpreted, allowing individuals to compare their experiences and reinforce their beliefs through social interaction. As one reflects on this communal aspect, it becomes evident that belief is often constructed collectively, with shared interpretations providing a sense of validation and stability. The gradual nature of change in communication patterns, such as delays or the eventual absence of letters, would be interpreted within this existing framework, often explained in ways that preserved the established narrative. And as one considers this tendency, it becomes clear that once belief is formed, it can be resistant to change, particularly in the absence of clear evidence to the contrary. The letters, therefore, played a significant role in shaping the beliefs of those in the outside world, not only through their content, but through their integration into a broader context of information and interpretation, illustrating how perception is constructed through the interaction of multiple factors. Segment 2. Rumors, Doubt, and Uncertainty. As one begins to look beyond the initial formation of belief and into the gradual emergence of doubt, it becomes evident that understanding in the outside world did not remain fixed, but evolved over time as new fragments of information appeared, often incomplete, sometimes contradictory, and frequently difficult to verify, creating a landscape in which certainty and uncertainty existed side by side. The letters, which once served as a primary source of reassurance, continued to influence perception, yet alongside them other forms of information began to circulate: rumors, personal accounts, indirect observations, and second-hand reports that introduced elements of ambiguity into the narrative that had previously seemed stable. As one reflects on the nature of these rumors, it becomes clear that they often arose in environments where information was limited, filling gaps with speculation and interpretation, and as one considers their role, it becomes evident that they can both challenge and reinforce existing beliefs, depending on how they are received and understood. The individuals encountering these rumors would not approach them in isolation, but would interpret them in relation to the information they already had, particularly the letters they had received, and as one reflects on this process, it becomes clear that new information is often filtered through existing frameworks of understanding, where it is either integrated or dismissed based on how well it aligns with what is already believed. The emotional context in which these rumors were received would also play a significant role, as the desire to maintain hope and stability could lead individuals to favor interpretations that minimized uncertainty, and as one considers this emotional influence, it becomes evident that belief is not solely a product of logic, but is shaped by the need for reassurance and continuity, the absence of clear and consistent evidence to confirm or refute. These rumors would further complicate the process, as individuals were left to navigate a space where multiple possibilities existed without definitive resolution, and as one reflects on this ambiguity, it becomes clear that uncertainty can persist when information is incomplete or conflicting. The letters, with their consistent tone and familiar format, would continue to provide a sense of stability within this uncertain environment, acting as anchors that grounded perception, even as new and potentially disruptive information emerged. As one considers the interplay between letters and rumors, it becomes evident that they represent different types of communication, one structured and direct, the other informal and variable, and that the relationship between them would influence how individuals interpreted both. The sharing of rumors within communities would amplify their impact as individuals discussed and compared what they had heard, creating a collective process of interpretation that could either reinforce or challenge existing beliefs. And as one reflects on this communal dimension, it becomes clear that understanding is often shaped through interaction, where ideas are tested and refined through discussion. The gradual accumulation of uncertainty, combined with the persistence of reassurance, would create a tension within the process of belief formation, where individuals sought to reconcile conflicting information in a way that made sense within their existing framework. And as one considers this tension, it becomes evident that belief is not static, but dynamic, evolving as new information is encountered. The outside world, therefore, becomes a space of negotiation between certainty and doubt, where the letters continue to provide a foundation for understanding, even as other sources of information introduce complexity and challenge. As one continues to reflect on this process, it becomes clear that the emergence of rumors and uncertainty did not immediately overturn the existing narrative, but gradually influenced how it was interpreted, illustrating the complexity of understanding in environments where information is limited and often incomplete. As one continues to examine the role of doubt within this evolving landscape of understanding, it becomes increasingly clear that uncertainty does not simply replace belief, but interacts with it, creating a layered and often conflicting perception of events in which individuals must navigate between what they trust and what they question. The letters, having established a foundation of reassurance, would not be easily dismissed, even as new information introduced the possibility of alternative interpretations, and as one reflects on this persistence, it becomes evident that belief, once formed, tends to resist change, particularly when it is supported by emotional connection and repeated reinforcement. The rumors and fragmented reports that circulated would often lack the clarity and consistency needed to fully challenge the narrative established by the letters, leading individuals to interpret them cautiously, weighing them against the more familiar and trusted messages they had received, and as one considers this cautious approach, it becomes clear that uncertainty can exist without leading to immediate transformation in belief. The process of questioning would therefore unfold gradually, influenced by the accumulation of small inconsistencies rather than a single decisive moment, and as one reflects on this gradual shift, it becomes evident that understanding often evolves through a series of adjustments rather than sudden change. The role of community in this process remains significant, as individuals share their thoughts, concerns, and interpretations with others, creating a collective environment in which ideas are discussed and evaluated, and as one considers this interaction, it becomes clear that social dynamics play a crucial role in shaping how doubt is expressed and resolved. The emotional dimension of this process cannot be overlooked, as the introduction of doubt into a previously stable belief system can create tension, uncertainty, and the need to reconcile conflicting perspectives, and as one reflects on this emotional response, it becomes evident that individuals may seek to preserve aspects of the original narrative while adjusting their understanding to incorporate new information. The letters, in this context, continue to serve as reference points, providing a baseline against which other information is measured, and as one considers this role, it becomes clear that they maintain their influence even as their interpretation begins to shift. The absence of definitive answers would prolong the state of uncertainty, as individuals navigate a space where multiple interpretations remain possible, and as one reflects on this ambiguity, it becomes evident that understanding in such contexts is often provisional, subject to revision as new information becomes available. The eventual recognition, for those who later examine these events, that this period was marked by a complex interplay between belief and doubt highlights the challenges of interpreting information in environments where access to truth is limited. As one continues to reflect on this dynamic, it becomes clear that the outside world was not defined by a single, unified understanding, but by a range of perspectives that evolved over time, shaped by the interaction of communication, context, and human interpretation. Chapter 7. The Outside World. Segment 3. When understanding began to shift. As one continues to follow the gradual evolution of perception in the outside world, it becomes evident that there comes a point where the balance between belief and doubt begins to shift in a more noticeable way, not through a single moment of revelation, but through the accumulation of inconsistencies, absences, and fragments of information that, when considered together, begin to challenge the framework that had previously guided understanding. The letters, which once served as anchors of reassurance, remain present in memory and interpretation, yet their meaning starts to change as they are viewed in light of emerging uncertainties, and as one reflects on this change, it becomes clear that interpretation is not fixed, but responsive to context, evolving as new elements are introduced. The absence of continued communication, once explained as delay or disruption, begins to carry different implications when it persists beyond what can be easily rationalized, and as one considers this persistence, it becomes evident that absence itself can become a form of information, prompting individuals to question the assumptions that had previously sustained their understanding. The rumors that had circulated, once considered uncertain or exaggerated, may begin to gain weight as they align with observed patterns, and as one reflects on this alignment, it becomes clear that information that fits within emerging observations can shift from speculation to possibility, influencing how individuals reassess what they know. The emotional dimension of this shift is significant, as the transition from reassurance to uncertainty involves not only cognitive adjustment, but also the management of fear, concern, and the need to reconcile conflicting perspectives. And as one considers this emotional process, it becomes evident that understanding is shaped by both intellectual and emotional factors. The sharing of these evolving interpretations within communities would further influence how they develop as individuals compare experiences, discuss inconsistencies, and attempt to construct a narrative that accounts for both the information they have received and the gaps that remain. And as one reflects on this communal process, it becomes clear that understanding is often formed through interaction, where collective reasoning contributes to the refinement of belief. The letters, in this context, do not disappear from consideration, but are reinterpreted, their content examined more closely for what it might reveal beyond its surface meaning, and as one considers this re-examination, it becomes evident that meaning can shift as context changes, allowing the same words to carry different implications over time. The gradual nature of this shift means that it does not occur uniformly, with different individuals and communities reaching different conclusions at different times, depending on the information available to them and the frameworks through which they interpret it. And as one reflects on this variability, it becomes clear that understanding is not a singular process, but a collection of individual and collective journeys toward greater awareness. The outside world, therefore, becomes a space in which perception is actively evolving, shaped by the interaction of past communication, present observation, and emerging information, illustrating how belief can change over time as new elements are integrated into existing frameworks. As one continues to reflect on this stage, it becomes evident that the shift in understanding represents a transition from a stable narrative to a more complex and uncertain one, where the need to reconcile conflicting information drives the process of interpretation forward. As one continues to explore this period of shifting understanding, it becomes increasingly clear that the process does not resolve immediately into clarity, but instead enters a phase of heightened complexity, where multiple interpretations coexist and individuals must navigate a landscape in which certainty is limited and questions outnumber answers. The letters, which once provided a sense of stability, now exist alongside emerging doubts, creating a layered perception in which past reassurance and present uncertainty interact in ways that are not easily reconciled. And as one reflects on this interaction, it becomes evident that understanding is often shaped by the coexistence of competing narratives rather than the dominance of a single perspective. The individuals who had relied on these letters must now reconsider their meaning, not necessarily discarding them, but integrating them into a broader context that includes new and sometimes conflicting information. And as one considers this integration, it becomes clear that belief evolves through adaptation, where existing frameworks are modified rather than replaced entirely. The role of community remains central in this process, as shared discussion and collective reasoning contribute to the development of new interpretations, allowing individuals to test ideas, compare experiences, and gradually build a more complex understanding of events. And as one reflects on this communal dynamic, it becomes evident that understanding is often a collaborative effort, shaped by interaction and exchange. The emotional dimension of this stage is particularly significant, as the presence of uncertainty can create a sense of tension and unease, prompting individuals to seek explanations that restore a sense of coherence, even when definitive answers are not available. And as one considers this emotional response, it becomes clear that the search for meaning is both an intellectual and emotional process. The gradual accumulation of information, combined with the persistence of unanswered questions, would eventually lead to a broader reassessment of the situation as individuals and communities attempt to construct a narrative that accounts for both what they have observed and what they have come to understand. And as one reflects on this reassessment, it becomes evident that understanding is not static, but continually evolving in response to new information and changing perspectives. The outside world, therefore, becomes a dynamic environment in which perception is shaped by an ongoing interplay between past communication, present observation, and emerging knowledge, illustrating how belief and understanding develop over time through a process of adaptation and reflection. Chapter 8. After the War. Segment 1. Discovering the Truth. As one moves beyond the period in which these letters were written and received, and into the years that followed the end of the war, it becomes evident that the process of understanding did not conclude with the events themselves, but instead entered a new phase, one defined by discovery, investigation, and the gradual uncovering of truths that had previously been obscured by distance, limitation, and controlled communication. The letters, once read as current messages within an unfolding situation, were now revisited within a different context, one in which additional information, testimonies, and evidence began to emerge, reshaping how they were interpreted and understood. As one reflects on this transition, it becomes clear that the act of reading these letters after the war was fundamentally different from reading them during the time they were written, as the knowledge available to readers had expanded significantly, allowing for a deeper and more complex understanding of what the messages might represent. The individuals who had preserved these letters, family members, friends, and later institutions, found themselves engaging with them in new ways, examining their content not only for what it said, but for what it might reveal when considered alongside emerging accounts of events. As one considers this re-examination, it becomes evident that the letters took on a new role, shifting from immediate communication to historical evidence, becoming part of a broader effort to reconstruct and understand what had occurred. The process of gathering testimonies from those who survived provided additional context, offering perspectives that were not available at the time the letters were written, and as one reflects on these testimonies, it becomes clear that they played a crucial role in bridging the gap between perception and reality, helping to explain the conditions under which the letters were composed and the limitations that shaped their content. The integration of these testimonies with the letters allowed for a more nuanced interpretation, where the messages could be understood not only as individual expressions, but as components of a larger system of communication and control. As one considers this integration, it becomes evident that understanding the past requires the combination of multiple sources, each contributing a piece of the overall picture, and that no single form of evidence can fully capture the complexity of events. The role of researchers, historians, and institutions in this process further expanded the scope of understanding, as systematic efforts were made to collect, preserve, and analyze documents, testimonies, and other materials, creating a framework through which the past could be studied in greater detail. As one reflects on this framework, it becomes clear that it provides the structure necessary to move from individual accounts to broader historical understanding, allowing patterns, connections, and insights to emerge. The letters within this framework became part of a larger narrative, contributing to an understanding that extended beyond their original context, illustrating how personal communication can serve as a window into historical processes when examined alongside other forms of evidence. The emotional dimension of this discovery cannot be overlooked, as the reinterpretation of these letters often involved confronting the gap between what was believed at the time and what was later understood, and as one considers this confrontation, it becomes evident that it adds a layer of complexity to the process of understanding, where knowledge is accompanied by reflection on how perception was shaped under different conditions. The act of discovery, therefore, is not only about uncovering new information but about reinterpreting existing information in light of that knowledge, creating a dynamic process in which understanding evolves over time. As one continues to reflect on this stage, it becomes clear that the period after the war represents a crucial moment in the life of these letters, where they transition from being part of an ongoing experience to becoming part of a historical record, carrying with them both the immediacy of personal communication and the broader significance of documented history. As one continues to examine the process of discovering the truth in the years following the war, it becomes increasingly clear that this process was not immediate or uniform, but unfolded, gradually shaped by the availability of evidence, the willingness of individuals to share their experiences, and the development of methods for collecting and interpreting information. The letters, as part of this evolving body of evidence, were approached with growing awareness of the context in which they had been written, allowing for interpretations that took into account both their content and the conditions that influenced their creation. As one reflects on this evolving awareness, it becomes evident that understanding is built over time, through the accumulation of information and the refinement of interpretation, rather than through a single moment of realization. The testimonies of survivors played a particularly important role in this process, providing first-hand accounts that offered insight into the realities that the letters could not fully convey, and as one considers these testimonies, it becomes clear that they serve as essential complements to written documents, filling in gaps and providing context that might otherwise remain unknown. The combination of letters and testimonies allowed for a more comprehensive understanding of events, where different forms of evidence could be compared and integrated to create a fuller picture, and as one reflects on this integration, it becomes evident that historical understanding relies on the interplay between multiple sources, each contributing unique perspectives and insights. The role of institutions in preserving and organizing these materials further supported this process, creating spaces where documents could be studied, shared, and interpreted within a structured framework. And as one considers this role, it becomes clear that preservation is not only about maintaining physical objects, but about enabling ongoing engagement with the past. The letters within these institutional contexts became part of a larger effort to document and understand history, contributing to educational, cultural, and scholarly initiatives that sought to convey the complexity of events to broader audiences. As one reflects on the impact of these efforts, it becomes evident that they have shaped how the past is remembered and understood, influencing both individual and collective perspectives. The process of discovering the truth, therefore, extends beyond the initial uncovering of information, involving continuous interpretation, discussion, and reflection, where each new insight contributes to a deeper and more nuanced understanding of events. As one continues to reflect on this stage, it becomes clear that the letters, once part of a system of controlled communication, have become tools for uncovering and understanding the past, illustrating how documents created under constraint can later serve as sources of knowledge and insight when examined within a broader historical context. Segment 2. Reinterpreting the letters. As one continues to follow the journey of these letters into the period after the war, it becomes evident that their meaning did not remain fixed once they were preserved, but instead entered a long and evolving process of reinterpretation, where each generation of readers approached them with new questions, new knowledge, and new perspectives, gradually transforming the way they were understood. The letters, once read as immediate and straightforward communication, began to be examined more closely, not only for what they explicitly stated, but for what they implied, omitted, or suggested when placed within the broader context that had since emerged. As one reflects on this shift, it becomes clear that reinterpretation is not a rejection of the original message, but an expansion of its meaning, where the text is viewed through a wider lens that includes historical, social, and emotional dimensions. The individuals who first revisited these letters after the war would have done so with a growing awareness of events that were not fully known at the time they were written, and as one considers this awareness, it becomes evident that it changes the way each sentence, each phrase, and each tone is perceived, adding layers of significance that were not visible to the original recipients. The act of rereading becomes an act of discovery, where familiar words are encountered in unfamiliar ways, revealing nuances that had previously gone unnoticed. As one reflects on this process, it becomes clear that meaning is not static but dynamic, shaped by the interaction between text and context, where each new piece of information contributes to a deeper understanding. The letters, in this sense, function as living documents whose interpretation evolves over time as they are read and reread in different circumstances. The role of historians and researchers in this process has been particularly significant, as systematic efforts to analyze these letters have brought new insights into how they were written, what constraints shaped them, and how they fit into the broader system of communication. As one considers this analytical approach, it becomes evident that reinterpretation involves both careful reading and contextual understanding, where the text is examined in relation to other sources, including testimonies, records, and historical analysis. The comparison of letters from different individuals, written at different times and under different conditions, has revealed patterns that provide insight into the structure and function of communication within this system, and as one reflects on these patterns, it becomes clear that the letters can be understood not only as individual expressions, but as part of a collective narrative that reflects shared experiences and constraints. The reinterpretation of these letters has also involved recognizing the limitations of what they could convey, acknowledging that their content was shaped by factors beyond the control of the writers, and as one considers these limitations, it becomes evident that understanding requires attention not only to what is present, but to what is absent, where silence and omission become part of the interpretive process. The emotional dimension of reinterpretation adds further complexity, as readers engage with the letters not only intellectually but also emotionally, responding to the human connection they represent while also grappling with the broader context in which they were written. As one reflects on this emotional engagement, it becomes clear that it influences how the letters are understood, adding depth to the process of interpretation and connecting the reader to the experiences of the past in a meaningful way. The letters, therefore, become more than historical documents. They become points of connection between past and present, where interpretation is shaped by both knowledge and empathy. As one continues to reflect on this stage, it becomes evident that the reinterpretation of these letters is an ongoing process, one that continues to evolve as new perspectives and insights emerge, illustrating how understanding of the past is continually reshaped by the interaction between evidence, context, and interpretation. As one continues to explore the evolving interpretation of these letters, it becomes increasingly clear that this process is not confined to academic or historical analysis, but extends into broader cultural and social contexts where the letters are read, shared, and understood by individuals with diverse perspectives and experiences, each bringing their own insights to the act of interpretation. The letters, preserved in archives and collections, have also been presented in museums, educational materials, and public discussions, where they serve as accessible entry points into understanding a complex and often difficult period of history. As one reflects on this broader engagement, it becomes evident that reinterpretation is shaped not only by new information but by the context in which the letters are encountered, where the setting, purpose, and audience influence how they are read and understood. The presentation of these letters within educational frameworks, for example, often emphasizes their role as personal accounts that provide insight into individual experiences, allowing learners to connect with history on a human level. And as one considers this educational role, it becomes clear that the letters serve as powerful tools for fostering understanding and reflection. The process of reinterpretation in these contexts involves guiding readers to consider both the content of the letters and the conditions under which they were written, encouraging a deeper awareness of how communication can be shaped by context and constraint. As one reflects on this guided interpretation, it becomes evident that it plays a crucial role in shaping how the letters are understood by new generations, influencing both knowledge and perspective. The cultural significance of these letters also extends beyond formal educational settings, as they are shared through books, documentaries, and other forms of media, reaching wider audiences and contributing to collective memory. As one considers this cultural dimension, it becomes clear that reinterpretation is a dynamic process that continues to evolve as the letters are encountered in new ways and by new audiences. The emotional impact of these letters remains a central aspect of their interpretation, as the connection they represent between individuals continues to resonate, prompting reflection on the human dimensions of historical events. As one reflects on this emotional resonance, it becomes evident that it contributes to the enduring relevance of the letters, allowing them to remain meaningful even as the context in which they were written becomes more distant in time. The reinterpretation of these letters, therefore, is not a single process, but a continuous and multifaceted engagement with the past, where meaning is shaped by the interaction of evidence, context, and perspective, illustrating how understanding evolves over time. Segment 3: What these letters teach us. As one continues to reflect on the long journey of these letters, from the moment they were written under constrained conditions to the years in which they were preserved, studied, and reinterpreted, it becomes evident that their significance lies not only in what they reveal about a specific moment in history, but in what they continue to teach about communication, perception, and the ways in which human understanding is shaped by context. The letters, though limited in form and content, offer a profound insight into how information can be constructed and interpreted within environments where knowledge is incomplete, illustrating the delicate balance between what is known, what is believed, and what is left uncertain. As one reflects on this balance, it becomes clear that communication is never entirely neutral, but is influenced by the conditions in which it occurs, the intentions of those involved, and the frameworks through which it is interpreted. The individuals who wrote these letters were navigating a complex space, attempting to communicate within boundaries that shaped what could be expressed, and as one considers their position, it becomes evident that their messages cannot be understood solely at face value, but must be examined within the broader context that influenced their creation. The recipients of these letters, in turn, interpreted them based on the information available to them, relying on trust, familiarity, and expectation to make sense of what they read. And as one reflects on this interpretive process, it becomes clear that understanding is often constructed through a combination of evidence and belief, where perception is shaped not only by what is presented, but by how it aligns with existing frameworks. The evolution of these interpretations over time highlights the dynamic nature of understanding, illustrating how new information can reshape the meaning of existing evidence, transforming simple messages into complex historical documents that carry multiple layers of significance. As one considers this transformation, it becomes evident that the letters serve as a reminder of the importance of context in interpreting any form of communication, emphasizing the need to consider both the content of a message and the conditions under which it was produced. The lessons drawn from these letters extend beyond their immediate historical context, offering insight into broader questions about how information is communicated, how trust is established, and how belief is formed and maintained. As one reflects on these broader implications, it becomes clear that the letters provide a valuable perspective on the relationship between communication and perception, illustrating how the two are intertwined in ways that shape both individual and collective understanding. The act of studying these letters, therefore, becomes not only an exploration of the past, but an opportunity to consider how similar processes operate in different contexts, highlighting the relevance of these insights in understanding communication more generally. As one continues to reflect on what these letters teach, it becomes evident that their significance lies in their ability to illuminate the complexities of human understanding, offering a window into how individuals navigate uncertainty, construct meaning, and communicate within the constraints of their environment. As one continues to explore the broader lessons that emerge from these letters, it becomes increasingly clear that they also offer insight into the resilience of human connection, demonstrating how individuals seek to maintain relationships, identity, and meaning even in circumstances where communication is limited and conditions are uncertain. The act of writing, as seen throughout these letters, represents more than the transmission of information. It reflects a desire to remain connected, to be remembered, and to sustain a sense of continuity with the world beyond immediate surroundings. And as one reflects on this aspect, it becomes evident that communication serves as a fundamental expression of human experience. The letters, though constrained in form, carry within them the traces of individual voices, revealing how people adapt their expression to fit the conditions they face while still attempting to convey something meaningful to those they care about. As one considers this adaptability, it becomes clear that communication is not a fixed process, but one that evolves in response to context, allowing individuals to navigate limitations while preserving connection. The recipients of these letters, engaging with them both at the time they were written and in later years, contribute to this process by interpreting, preserving, and sharing the messages, ensuring that the connection they represent continues beyond the original exchange. As one reflects on this continuity, it becomes evident that the letters function as enduring links between individuals, carrying with them the presence of those who wrote them and allowing that presence to persist across time. The preservation and study of these letters further extend their impact, transforming them into sources of knowledge that contribute to a broader understanding of history and human experience. And as one considers this transformation, it becomes clear that personal communication can take on new significance when placed within a larger context. The lessons drawn from these letters, therefore, encompass both the specific and the universal, offering insight into a particular moment in history while also illuminating broader patterns of communication, perception, and connection that remain relevant in other contexts. As one continues to reflect on these lessons, it becomes evident that the letters serve as reminders of the importance of examining information critically, considering context, and recognizing the ways in which communication can be shaped by external factors, while also acknowledging the enduring human desire to connect, express, and be understood. Chapter 9, Memory and Responsibility. Segment 1. Preserving what was written. As one moves further into the legacy of these letters, it becomes evident that their continued existence is not accidental, but the result of deliberate acts of preservation carried out by individuals, families, and institutions who recognize their significance not only as personal keepsakes but as pieces of a larger historical record that needed to be protected from loss, damage, or forgetting. The letters, once written in moments of uncertainty and received in moments of fragile reassurance, were often kept carefully, stored among personal belongings, folded into boxes placed within books, or held close as reminders of connection, and as one reflects on these acts of preservation, it becomes clear that they were motivated by both emotional attachment and an intuitive understanding that these messages carried meaning beyond their immediate context. The physical nature of the letters, the texture of the paper, the marks of handwriting, the visible signs of time, adds another dimension to their significance, as they provide tangible evidence of the individuals who wrote them, offering a connection that extends beyond words alone. As one considers the importance of these physical qualities, it becomes evident that preservation involves not only maintaining the content of the letters, but also protecting the material form through which that content is conveyed, ensuring that future readers can engage with them in a way that reflects their original presence. The transition of these letters from private possessions to historical artifacts often involved a shift in how they were understood, as families and individuals began to recognize their broader importance and chose to share them with researchers, archives, and museums, allowing them to become part of a collective effort to document and understand the past. As one reflects on this transition, it becomes clear that it represents a movement from personal memory to public history, where individual experiences contribute to a larger narrative that extends beyond the lives of those directly involved. The role of institutions in this process has been significant, as archives and museums provide the resources and expertise needed to preserve these letters in conditions that protect them from deterioration, ensuring their longevity and accessibility. As one considers the work involved in preservation, it becomes evident that it requires careful attention to detail, from controlling environmental conditions to cataloging and documenting each item, creating systems that allow the letters to be stored safely while also being made available for study and interpretation. The act of preservation, therefore, becomes a form of responsibility where the goal is not only to protect the physical object but to maintain the connection it represents, allowing the voices contained within these letters to continue to be heard. The individuals and institutions involved in this process play a crucial role in shaping how the letters are accessed and understood, influencing the ways in which they are presented, interpreted, and integrated into broader narratives of history. As one reflects on this influence, it becomes clear that preservation is not a neutral act, but one that involves decisions about what to keep, how to present it, and how to contextualize it, all of which contribute to shaping understanding. The letters, once part of a system of controlled communication, have thus become part of a different system, one focused on documentation, education, and remembrance, where their significance is recognized and sustained over time. As one continues to reflect on this stage, it becomes evident that preserving these letters is not only about maintaining a record of the past, but about ensuring that the experiences they represent remain part of an ongoing conversation, contributing to a deeper understanding of history and the human experience. As one continues to explore the process of preserving these letters, it becomes increasingly clear that preservation is not only about maintaining physical objects, but also about safeguarding the meanings, contexts, and connections that those objects represent, ensuring that they remain accessible and understandable to future generations who will encounter them in different circumstances and with different perspectives. The letters, once written within a specific moment and context, now exist within a broader historical framework that continues to evolve, and as one reflects on this evolution, it becomes evident that preserving the letters involves preserving the knowledge and context that allow them to be interpreted accurately and meaningfully. The role of documentation in this process is essential, as the letters are cataloged, described, and connected to other sources of information, creating a network of knowledge that supports their interpretation and situates them within a larger narrative. As one considers the importance of this documentation, it becomes clear that it provides the foundation for understanding, allowing readers to move beyond the surface of the text and engage with the deeper layers of meaning that emerge when context is taken into account. The integration of these letters into educational and cultural frameworks further extends their reach, ensuring that they are not only preserved, but actively engaged with, studied, and discussed, contributing to a broader awareness of the events they are connected to. As one reflects on this integration, it becomes evident that preservation is an ongoing process, one that involves not only protecting the letters themselves, but also creating opportunities for them to be encountered and understood in meaningful ways. The responsibility associated with this process extends beyond institutions to include individuals, educators, and communities who engage with these letters and contribute to their interpretation and transmission, ensuring that their significance is recognized and sustained. As one considers this shared responsibility, it becomes clear that preservation is a collective effort, one that relies on the participation of many to ensure that the letters continue to be part of the historical and cultural conversation. The ethical dimension of preservation also plays a role, as decisions about how to present and interpret these letters involve considerations of respect, accuracy, and sensitivity, recognizing the human experiences they represent and the impact they may have on those who engage with them. As one reflects on these ethical considerations, it becomes evident that preserving these letters is not only a technical task, but a moral one, requiring careful thought about how to balance accessibility with respect and how to present the letters in a way that honors their significance while supporting understanding. The letters, therefore, become more than artifacts. They become part of an ongoing dialogue about history, memory, and responsibility, illustrating how the preservation of communication can contribute to a deeper and more nuanced understanding of the past. Segment 2. Telling the story with care. As one continues to reflect on the preservation of these letters, it becomes evident that safeguarding them is only one part of a broader responsibility, and that equally important is the way in which their stories are told, interpreted, and shared with others, shaping how they are understood across different contexts and generations. The act of telling the story of these letters is not a simple process of presenting facts, but a careful balance between conveying information, providing context, and respecting the human experiences that these messages represent. And as one reflects on this balance, it becomes clear that how a story is told can influence not only what is understood, but how it is felt and remembered. The letters, though brief and constrained in form, carry with them layers of meaning that require thoughtful interpretation. And as one considers the process of sharing these meanings, it becomes evident that it involves decisions about emphasis, framing, and context, all of which contribute to shaping the narrative that is presented. The individuals and institutions involved in telling these stories must therefore consider not only the content of the letters, but also the broader environment in which they are being shared, recognizing that different audiences bring different perspectives, levels of knowledge, and emotional responses to the material. As one reflects on the diversity of audiences, it becomes clear that storytelling must adapt to meet these varying needs, providing clarity and context while avoiding oversimplification and ensuring that the complexity of the subject is preserved. The role of language in this process is particularly significant, as the words chosen to describe events, actions, and experiences can shape how they are perceived, influencing both understanding and emotional response. And as one considers the impact of language, it becomes evident that careful attention must be paid to how information is presented, avoiding terms or descriptions that might distort or diminish the reality of what occurred. The integration of these letters into broader narratives of history also requires careful consideration, as they must be placed within a context that allows their significance to be understood without isolating them from the larger system of which they were a part. As one reflects on this integration, it becomes Clear that storytelling involves connecting individual experiences to collective understanding, illustrating how personal communication can contribute to a more comprehensive picture of historical events. The emotional dimension of these stories adds another layer of complexity, as the letters represent real individuals and relationships, and as one considers this aspect, it becomes evident that storytelling must be approached with sensitivity, acknowledging the impact that these narratives can have on those who engage with them. The goal is not only to inform but to foster understanding, reflection, and awareness, creating a space in which the past can be explored in a way that is both meaningful and respectful. As one continues to reflect on this process, it becomes clear that telling the story of these letters is an act of responsibility, requiring careful thought about how to balance accuracy, context, and empathy, ensuring that the messages they carry are conveyed in a way that honors their significance while supporting a deeper understanding of the past. As one continues to examine the responsibility involved in telling these stories, it becomes increasingly clear that this process extends beyond the initial act of presentation, involving an ongoing commitment to reflection, revision, and engagement, where understanding is continually refined as new perspectives and insights emerge. The letters, once integrated into broader narratives, do not remain static, but continue to be reinterpreted as they are encountered by new audiences and considered within evolving frameworks of knowledge. And as one reflects on this ongoing process, it becomes evident that storytelling is not a final act, but a continuous dialogue between past and present. The individuals and institutions responsible for sharing these stories must therefore remain attentive to the ways in which interpretation can change over time, recognizing that each generation may bring new questions and concerns that influence how the letters are understood. As one considers the role of these changing perspectives, it becomes clear that they contribute to a more dynamic and inclusive understanding of history, allowing for the incorporation of diverse viewpoints and experiences that enrich the overall narrative. The ethical dimension of storytelling remains central in this process, as the need to balance accessibility with respect continues to shape decisions about how the letters are presented, ensuring that their significance is conveyed without diminishing the experiences they represent. As one reflects on this ethical balance, it becomes evident that it requires careful consideration of both content and context, as well as an awareness of the potential impact on those who engage with the material. The use of these letters in educational settings further highlights the importance of responsible storytelling, as educators must guide learners in understanding both the historical context and the human dimensions of the letters, encouraging critical thinking while fostering empathy and awareness. As one considers the role of education, it becomes clear that it provides an opportunity to engage with these letters in a way that supports both knowledge and reflection, helping individuals to develop a deeper understanding of the complexities of communication, perception, and history. The continued engagement with these letters through study, discussion, and reflection ensures that their significance is not only preserved, but actively explored, contributing to an ongoing process of understanding that extends beyond the initial act of storytelling. Segment 3. Carrying the memory forward. As one continues to reflect on the journey of these letters, from the moment they were written, through their preservation, reinterpretation, and careful presentation, it becomes evident that their significance does not end with understanding, but extends into the responsibility of carrying that understanding forward, ensuring that the memory they represent continues to exist within both individual awareness and collective consciousness. The letters, once part of a system that shaped perception in a particular moment, have become part of a broader narrative that connects past and present, and as one reflects on this transformation, it becomes clear that memory is not something that remains fixed in time, but something that is actively maintained, shaped, and transmitted across generations. The act of carrying memory forward involves more than simply remembering. It requires engagement, reflection, and a willingness to consider how the past informs the present, and as one considers this process, it becomes evident that it is both an individual and collective responsibility. The individuals who encounter these letters today are not passive recipients of information, but active participants in the process of memory, interpreting the messages, reflecting on their significance, and integrating them into their understanding of history and human experience. As one reflects on this role, it becomes clear that memory is sustained through interaction, where each engagement contributes to its continuation and evolution. The letters themselves serve as anchors within this process, providing tangible points of connection that ground memory in specific experiences while also allowing for broader reflection on the conditions and systems in which they were created. As one considers the role of these anchors, it becomes evident that they provide a sense of continuity, linking individual stories to larger historical narratives and ensuring that the experiences they represent are not lost over time. The responsibility of carrying memory forward also involves recognizing the limitations of any single perspective, acknowledging that understanding is shaped by context and that new insights can emerge as different viewpoints are considered. As one reflects on this openness to perspective, it becomes clear that it is essential for maintaining a dynamic and inclusive understanding of the past, allowing memory to evolve while remaining grounded in evidence and experience. The emotional dimension of this process is significant, as the act of remembering involves not only intellectual engagement, but also an awareness of the human experiences represented by the letters, and as one considers this emotional aspect, it becomes evident that it contributes to the depth and meaning of memory, connecting individuals to the past in a way that is both personal and collective. The continuation of this memory through education, discussion, and cultural expression further extends its reach, ensuring that the letters remain part of an ongoing conversation that spans time and context. As one reflects on this extension, it becomes clear that carrying memory forward is not a static task, but an active process that involves continuous engagement, interpretation, and reflection, illustrating how the past remains present through the ways in which it is remembered and understood. As one continues to explore the responsibility of carrying memory forward, it becomes increasingly clear that this process is not only about preservation and interpretation, but also about how memory is integrated into broader frameworks of understanding, shaping the way individuals and societies engage with history and apply its lessons to the present. The letters, as part of this process, provide a unique perspective that emphasizes the human dimension of historical events, illustrating how individual experiences contribute to larger narratives and how communication can reflect both personal intention and systemic influence. As one reflects on this contribution, it becomes evident that integrating these letters into broader discussions of history allows for a more nuanced and comprehensive understanding, one that acknowledges both the structural and personal aspects of events. The act of integration involves placing the letters within contexts that allow their significance to be fully understood, connecting them to other sources of information and perspectives that together create a more complete picture. As one considers this contextualization, it becomes clear that it is essential for ensuring that the letters are not isolated from the broader historical framework, but are understood as part of a complex and interconnected system. The role of education and cultural engagement in this process is particularly important, as these platforms provide opportunities for individuals to encounter the letters, reflect on their meaning, and consider their relevance in relation to contemporary issues and perspectives. As one reflects on the impact of these platforms, it becomes evident that they play a crucial role in shaping how memory is understood and transmitted, influencing both individual awareness and collective consciousness. The ongoing engagement with these letters also highlights the importance of critical thinking, as readers are encouraged to consider not only what is presented but how it is presented, and to recognize the ways in which communication can be influenced by context and constraint. As one considers the role of critical thinking, it becomes clear that it is essential for navigating complex historical material, allowing individuals to engage with the past in a thoughtful and informed manner. The letters, therefore, serve not only as sources of information but as tools for reflection and learning, illustrating how communication can shape perception and how understanding can evolve over time. Chapter 10. The Final Reflection. Segment 1. The Meaning Behind the Words. As one arrives at the final stage of this journey, it becomes evident that the letters, when viewed in their entirety, from the moment they were written to the ways they were received, interpreted, preserved, and ultimately understood, carry a meaning that extends far beyond their original purpose, offering insight not only into a specific historical context, but into the broader nature of communication, perception, and human connection. The words written on those small pieces of paper were shaped by constraints, influenced by conditions, and guided by systems that determined what could and could not be expressed, yet within those limitations they still carried fragments of individual voice, intention, and identity, and as one reflects on this complexity, it becomes clear that the letters represent a convergence of multiple layers of meaning, where personal expression and external influence exist simultaneously. The individuals who wrote these letters were navigating a space between what they experienced and what they could communicate, making choices within the boundaries imposed upon them, and as one considers these choices, it becomes evident that each word carries significance not only for what it says, but for what it represents within that context. The recipients of these letters, reading them without full knowledge of the conditions under which they were written, would interpret them through the lens of trust, familiarity, and expectation, constructing an understanding that aligned with the information available to them, and as one reflects on this interpretive process, it becomes clear that meaning is not contained solely within the text, but emerges through the interaction between the message and the perspective of the reader. The evolution of this understanding over time, as new information became available and the broader context was revealed, highlights the dynamic nature of meaning, illustrating how interpretation can change as knowledge expands and perspectives shift. As one considers this evolution, it becomes evident that the letters serve as examples of how communication can carry multiple meanings simultaneously, shaped by both the conditions of their creation and the context of their interpretation. The absence of certain details, the presence of reassurance, the structure of the messages, all of these elements contribute to a layered understanding in which meaning is constructed through both what is present and what is absent. As one reflects on this interplay, it becomes clear that the letters reveal the complexity of communication under constrained conditions, illustrating how individuals adapt their expression while navigating limitations that influence what can be conveyed. The broader significance of these letters lies in their ability to illuminate how perception is shaped, how belief is formed, and how understanding evolves, offering insight into processes that extend beyond the specific events in which they were created. As one continues to reflect on the meaning behind the words, it becomes evident that the letters are not simply historical artifacts, but enduring expressions of human experience, carrying within them the traces of individuals who sought to communicate, connect, and make sense of their circumstances within the boundaries they faced. As one continues to reflect on the deeper meaning carried within these letters, it becomes increasingly clear that their significance lies not only in what they reveal about the past, but in how they invite ongoing reflection in the present, encouraging a thoughtful engagement with the nature of communication, the formation of belief, and the ways in which individuals navigate uncertainty. The letters, when considered in their full context, demonstrate how communication can be shaped by external conditions while still retaining elements of personal intention, illustrating the balance between constraint and expression that defines much of human interaction. In complex environments, as one reflects on this balance, it becomes evident that understanding communication requires attention to both content and context, recognizing that what is written is influenced by factors that extend beyond the immediate act of writing. The recipients of these letters, interpreting them within their own frameworks of knowledge and experience, contribute to this process of meaning-making, highlighting how understanding is constructed through interaction rather than existing as a fixed property of the text. As one considers this interactive nature of meaning, it becomes clear that the letters serve as a reminder of the importance of critical engagement with information, encouraging readers to consider not only what is presented, but how and why it is presented in a particular way. The evolution of interpretation over time further emphasizes this point, illustrating how new knowledge and perspectives can reshape understanding, transforming simple messages into complex historical documents that carry multiple layers of significance. As one reflects on this transformation, it becomes evident that the letters offer insight into the ways in which meaning is constructed, negotiated, and reinterpreted, providing a framework for understanding how communication operates in both historical and contemporary contexts. Segment 2, What We Choose to Remember. As one continues into the final reflection, it becomes evident that memory is not simply a passive record of what has happened, but an active process shaped by what is chosen, preserved, emphasized, and shared, and within this process, the letters occupy a unique position, acting as both fragments of personal experience and elements of a broader narrative that continues to evolve over time. The act of remembering, much like the act of writing, is influenced by context, perspective, and intention, and as one reflects on this, it becomes clear that what is remembered is often shaped by the frameworks through which events are understood, as well as by the emotional and intellectual needs of those engaging with the past. The letters, once immediate communications, have become part of this process, their meanings shaped by how they are interpreted and integrated into larger narratives. And as one considers this transformation, it becomes evident that memory is constructed through interaction between the past and the present, where historical evidence is continually re-examined in light of new understanding. The individuals who preserved these letters made choices, sometimes deliberate, sometimes instinctive, that ensured their survival, and as one reflects on these acts of preservation, it becomes clear that they represent an early stage in the formation of memory, where decisions about what to keep and what to let go begin to shape how the past will be understood. The transition of these letters into archives, museums, and educational settings further extends this process, as they are placed within frameworks that guide interpretation and provide context, allowing them to be understood not only as personal artifacts, but as components of a larger historical narrative. As one considers the role of these frameworks, it becomes evident that they influence how memory is structured, determining which aspects are highlighted, how they are presented, and how they are connected to broader themes and events. The emotional dimension of memory plays a significant role in this process, as the letters carry with them the voices and experiences of individuals, creating a connection that resonates with readers and influences how the past is perceived and remembered. As one reflects on this emotional resonance, it becomes clear that it contributes to the enduring impact of the letters, allowing them to remain meaningful, even as the context in which they were written becomes more distant in time. The act of remembering, therefore, is not only about preserving information, but about engaging with it in a way that acknowledges its complexity and significance, recognizing that each piece of evidence contributes to a broader understanding of history. As one continues to reflect on what we choose to remember, it becomes evident that this choice carries responsibility, as it shapes how future generations will understand the past, influencing both knowledge and perspective. The letters, in this context, serve as reminders of the importance of thoughtful and careful engagement with historical material, illustrating how memory is shaped through the interaction of preservation, interpretation, and reflection. As one continues to explore the idea of what we choose to remember, it becomes increasingly clear that this process is not only about preserving the past, but also about interpreting it in ways that give it meaning in the present, creating a connection between historical events and contemporary understanding that allows memory to remain relevant across time. The letters, as part of this process, provide a unique perspective that emphasizes the human dimension of history, illustrating how individual experiences contribute to larger narratives and how communication can reflect both personal intention and systemic influence. As one reflects on this perspective, it becomes evident that the inclusion of these letters in broader discussions of history allows for a more nuanced and comprehensive understanding, one that acknowledges both the structural and personal aspects of events. The act of remembering, therefore, involves not only the preservation of information, but also the interpretation and integration of that information into frameworks that allow it to be understood and engaged with meaningfully. As one considers the role of interpretation, it becomes clear that it is shaped by a variety of factors, including cultural context, educational background, and personal perspective, all of which influence how individuals and communities engage with historical material. The letters, when encountered in different contexts, may be understood in different ways, highlighting the dynamic nature of memory and the ways in which meaning can evolve over time. As one reflects on this evolution, it becomes evident that memory is not static, but continually shaped by the interaction between past and present, where each new generation brings its own perspectives and questions to the material. The responsibility of remembering, therefore, involves an ongoing commitment to engaging with the past, thoughtfully and critically, recognizing the complexity of historical events and the importance of considering multiple perspectives in order to develop a deeper and more accurate understanding. Segment 3. The silence that still speaks. As one reaches the final reflection on these letters, it becomes evident that beyond the words that were written, beyond the systems that shaped them, and beyond the interpretations that have evolved over time, there exists another powerful element that continues to influence understanding, the silence that surrounds them, the absence of further communication, the unspoken conclusions that were never written, yet remain deeply embedded within the meaning of what survives. The letters, in their preserved form, represent moments of connection, fragments of communication that bridge distance and uncertainty, yet they are also defined by what follows them, by the lack of continuation, by the point at which the messages stop, leaving behind not only what was said, but what was never able to be expressed. As one reflects on this silence, it becomes clear that it is not an empty space, but a presence in itself, shaping how the letters are read, understood, and remembered. The recipients of these letters, at the time they were received, would not have immediately understood the significance of this silence, interpreting the absence of further communication within the frameworks they had already constructed, seeking explanations that aligned with what they believed. And as one considers this initial interpretation, it becomes evident that silence can be ambiguous, open to multiple meanings depending on context and expectation. Over time, however, as more information became available and the broader context of events was revealed, the silence took on a different significance, becoming part of the narrative itself, a marker of transition between what was known and what was later understood. As one reflects on this shift, it becomes clear that the meaning of silence evolves alongside the interpretation of the letters, transforming from uncertainty into a powerful indicator of absence, loss, and the limits of communication. The letters, therefore, exist within a space that is defined by both presence and absence, where the words that remain are inseparable from the silence that follows them. As one considers this interplay, it becomes evident that understanding these letters requires attention not only to what is written, but to what is not written, to the gaps, the omissions, and the endings that define their boundaries. The emotional dimension of this silence is profound, as it represents the point at which connection is no longer sustained through communication, leaving behind only the memory of what once existed. As one reflects on this emotional aspect, it becomes clear that the silence carries weight, influencing how the letters are experienced by those who read them, adding depth to their meaning and shaping the way they are remembered. The preservation of these letters ensures that the silence they contain is not forgotten, allowing it to continue to speak through the absence it represents, reminding readers of the limitations of communication and the realities that lie beyond it. As one continues to reflect on this final aspect, it becomes evident that the silence is not separate from the letters, but an integral part of their meaning, illustrating how absence can carry as much significance as presence in shaping understanding. As one continues to reflect on the silence that follows these letters, it becomes increasingly clear that its significance extends beyond the specific context in which the letters were written, offering a broader perspective on the nature of communication, memory, and understanding, where what is left unsaid becomes as important as what is expressed. The letters, preserved and studied over time, provide a foundation for understanding, yet the silence that surrounds them invites deeper reflection, prompting questions about what could not be communicated, what was beyond the limits of expression, and how those limits shape the meaning of what remains. As one considers these questions, it becomes evident that silence is not merely the absence of sound or text, but a form of presence that influences interpretation, guiding how individuals engage with the material and how they construct meaning from it. The individuals who read these letters today encounter both the words and the silence, engaging with a form of communication that is incomplete yet deeply meaningful, and as one reflects on this experience, it becomes clear that understanding often emerges from the interaction between what is known and what is unknown. The silence, in this sense, becomes a space for reflection, where readers are invited to consider the limitations of communication and the ways in which context shapes what can be expressed. As one considers the broader implications of this idea, it becomes evident that it extends beyond the letters themselves, offering insight into how communication operates in many different contexts, where meaning is shaped not only by what is said, but by what is left unsaid. The letters, therefore, serve as a reminder of the complexity of communication, illustrating how words and silence together create a fuller picture of human experience, where presence and absence are intertwined in ways that shape understand. As this journey comes to an end, what remains is not just a series of letters, but a deeper understanding of how words, silence, and perception can shape reality itself. These messages, written in moments of uncertainty, traveled across distance carrying reassurance, hope, and connection, yet behind them existed a truth that would only be understood much later. And even today they continue to speak not just through what was written, but through what was left unsaid. This story is a reminder that history is not only made of events, but of human voices, voices that tried to communicate, to connect, and to be remembered. And as long as we continue to listen, to reflect, and to learn, those voices are never truly lost. If you found this documentary meaningful, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and be part of a community that explores history with depth, clarity, and respect. There are many more stories like this, stories that reveal not just what happened, but how it was experienced, understood, and remembered. Thank you for watching.